You'd better shut up, Harold Briggs snapped, stepping so close, Annie. A cheap little maid like you doesn't get to question what happens in Mr. Whitmore's bedroom. Annie Carter held the amber pill bottle against her chest, her voice shaking but clear. I'm only telling the truth. This is affecting his health. Harold's eyes narrowed. You think you have the right to raise your voice and lecture me? He said. Annie lowered her head at once. I didn't mean it that way, sir, she said quietly. It's just, this isn't a sedative. Harold stepped closer and pointed a stiff finger at her face. What do you know about medicine? You dare accuse me? Harold's voice rose, sharp enough to carry down the hall. You think you can smear the reputation of this house? I'm not accusing anyone, Annie tried to explain, her voice trembling, but her eyes held steady. My grandmother takes this kind of medicine. I know it well enough to see something is wrong. Shut your mouth, Harold barked. The words that followed came out with the cruelty. People from places like yours are good at only two things: stealing and lying. You think you're smart? Your job is to scrub floors, not use that foolish head of yours to poke around your employer's belongings. Or is that what this is? Were you planning to steal the pills and sell them, then blame someone else when you got caught? Filthy little liar. For months, she had swallowed his insults because she needed the job, but this was not about pride anymore. This was about a sick man's medication. Annie straightened her back, looked Harold. I am not lying. I'm trying to warn you. If you don't believe me, then have it tested. Harold raged. You still dare talk back to me? Get out of this house right now. You're fired. And I won't pay a single cent of wages to someone like, who gave you permission to fire her? Behind them, a man's cane tapped once against the marble floor. Billionaire Ethan Whitmore stood in the doorway. Then I suggest someone starts telling me the truth. For a moment, no one moved. Harold Briggs recovered first. Mr. Whitmore, he said, giving a small bow of his head. You're home early. I was not informed. Sounds like you didn't want me to come home, Harold. Harold blinked. Harold gave a dry little laugh. The kind people use when they want danger to look foolish. Sir, it's nothing. Miss Carter misunderstood something while cleaning your room. I was handling it. He never called her that when they were alone. When they were alone, she was girl. You there, or the new help. Ethan's gaze shifted to her. Did you misunderstand something? Annie hesitated, her voice caught in her throat. Harold stood close enough for her to feel his warning without him speaking it. Say nothing. Apologize. Keep the job. But the pill bottle felt heavy in her hands. I don't think I misunderstood, sir, she said. Harold's face hardened. Annie. Ethan lifted one finger, and Harold stopped. Let her speak, Ethan said. Annie drew a breath and looked at the bottle instead of Harold. I was cleaning your room, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Briggs told me to change the linens, dust the shelves, and wipe down the bathroom counter. I didn't open anything I wasn't supposed to. Your medicine tray was already on the counter. Ethan nodded once. Go on. This bottle says it's your evening sedative. The light dose one. She turned the bottle so he could see the label. But the pills inside don't look right. Harold scoffed. She has no idea what she's talking about. Annie kept going before fear could swallow the rest. My grandmother takes several medications. Heart pills, blood pressure medication, diabetes medication. I pick them up for her. I sort them every Sunday night. I know to check the shape, the color, and the markings because the pharmacy made a mistake once. It almost sent her to the hospital. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly at the bottle. Annie unscrewed the cap with careful fingers and tipped one pill into her palm. This one has a different marking than the one listed on the instruction sheet in your drawer. It may be nothing. Maybe the pharmacy changed manufacturers. But I told Mr. Briggs someone should check before you take it again. Sir, don't waste your time with her, Harold said quickly. She only wants attention. She doesn't know anything about medicine. She hasn't even had a proper education. It is not her place, Harold said. Ethan did not look at him. That wasn't the question. Harold's mouth closed. Annie stared at the small white pill in her palm. Ethan stepped closer. How long ago did you notice this? He asked. About 20 minutes ago, sir. And you came to Harold? Yes. What did he say? Harold answered before she could. I told her, respectfully, that medical matters in this household are not to be handled by cleaning staff. I intended to call Dr. Reed myself, once I confirmed whether there was any real issue. Annie turned toward him. That's not what happened. Ethan saw it. What happened? Ethan asked. Annie's voice lowered. He told me to keep my mouth shut. He said a girl like me doesn't get to question what happens in your bedroom. Harold took one step forward. Sir, she is twisting my words. No, Annie said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. I'm not. Ethan's face hardened. Give me the bottle. Ethan looked at the pill bottle in his hand, and his voice dropped. Harold, who is responsible for my medication every evening? Harold lowered his head slightly. Sir, I usually check the tray before the nurse arrives. You usually check it, Ethan repeated. Or you change it? Harold stiffened. I have never done anything to harm you, sir. Then why, when there was a warning, did you try to make her stay quiet? Harold hesitated. Ethan cut him off. This came from my bathroom counter? Yes, sir, Annie said. And you found it while cleaning? Yes, sir. Harold cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, with respect, I think it would be wise not to encourage this sort of behavior. If every member of the staff starts inspecting your private belongings, the household will become impossible to manage. Ethan looked at him. My health is not a private belonging, Harold. Ethan slipped the bottle into the inside pocket of his coat, then held out his other hand. The pill. Annie looked down and realized she was still holding the small white tablet in her palm. He studied it for a moment. Where is the instruction sheet you mentioned? In the drawer beside your sink, sir. Show me. Harold moved at once. I can retrieve it. No, Ethan said. She can. The words stopped Harold. Annie walked back into the bedroom. She opened the drawer by the sink and found the folded pharmacy sheet exactly where she had seen it earlier. She brought it back with both hands. Ethan took it and unfolded the paper. He read in silence. Harold stood near the wall, with his hands clasped in front of him. You said your grandmother takes similar medication, Ethan said without looking up. She used to, sir. Not the exact same prescription, but close enough that I recognized the markings. Her doctor changed it last year, after she got too dizzy in the mornings. You manage her medicine? I help her with it. How often? Every week. Sunday nights mostly. I separate everything into one of those pill boxes, morning and evening. Annie hesitated, then added, She says she trusts my eyes more than her own now. Ethan looked up at that. For a moment, his expression shifted. Does she know you're working late today? Annie swallowed. No, sir. She thinks I'll be home before supper. That answer seemed to sit with him longer than the others. Call her. Annie blinked. Sir, call your grandmother. Tell her you're delayed and that you're safe. Harold made a small sound. Mr. Whitmore, surely that can wait. Ethan did not turn his head. Why should it? Harold had no answer. Annie reached into her pocket for her phone. The screen had a crack across the corner. Miss Evelyn answered on the third ring. Annie, you on the bus yet? No, Grandma. I'm still at work. There was a pause. Something happened? Annie glanced at Ethan, then at Harold. I found something wrong with Mr. Whitmore's medicine. They're checking it. Did you tell the truth? Yes, ma'am. Then stand straight. Annie closed her eyes for half a second. Yes, ma'am. And don't let anybody make you apologize for having eyes. If Annie's courage touched your heart, please like this video. Comment where you are watching from because someone near you may be watching this story too. And if you believe the truth should never be silenced, subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories. Annie almost smiled despite the fear in her chest. I won't. When she ended the call, Ethan was watching her. Ethan folded the pharmacy sheet and placed it with the bottle. Caleb should be calling Dr. Reed. Until he arrives, this stays with me. Sir, Harold said. Trying again. I must insist you consider the possibility that Miss Carter created this confusion herself. She was alone in your room. She had access to the tray. It would not be the first time a desperate employee tried to make herself useful by inventing a crisis. Ethan's voice lowered. Desperate? Harold seemed to realize he had chosen the wrong word. But pride pushed him forward. She needs the work. Everyone knows that. Girls in her position sometimes think drama gives them value. Annie looked down. Ethan took one step toward Harold. Do you discuss my employees' financial situations often? I only meant, I know what you meant. Ethan looked toward the stairs. Caleb, his driver, appeared almost at once, phone in hand. Dr. Reed is on his way, sir. He said 25 minutes, maybe 30 with the rain. Nora Ellis is returning your call. Good. Have security preserve the camera footage from this hallway and my suite for the last 48 hours. Harold's head snapped up. Security footage? Yes, Ethan said. Is that a problem? No, sir. Of course not. Then why do you look troubled? Harold forced a thin smile. I'm concerned for the household, sir. False accusations can damage trust. So can poison trust, Ethan said. Ethan turned to her. Miss Carter, you will wait in the sitting room outside my office. Caleb will bring you something to eat. I'm all right, sir. When did you last eat? The question caught her off guard. This morning. Ethan looked at Caleb. Soup, sandwich, tea if she wants it. Annie wanted to refuse, but her stomach had been empty since a slice of toast before sunrise. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan turned to Harold. You will wait in the library. Mr. Whitmore. That was not a request. Harold bowed his head. Yes, sir. As Harold walked away, he passed close to Annie. He did not touch her. He did not need to. His whisper barely moved the air. You have no idea what you've done. Annie did not answer. Caleb stepped between them before Harold could say more. Then Caleb looked at Annie. Come on, Miss Carter. Sitting room's this way. She followed him down the hall, leaving Ethan standing alone near the bedroom door with the bottle in his coat pocket and the pharmacy paper folded in his hand. At the turn of the corridor, Annie looked back once. Ethan had not moved. He was staring at the medicine tray inside his room, his cane planted beside him, his face no longer just tired. In the sitting room, Caleb brought her a bowl of chicken noodle soup, half a turkey sandwich, and a mug of tea. Annie wrapped both hands around the warm mug. She thought of Harold's finger in her face. She thought of the word fired. She thought of Miss Evelyn telling her to stand straight. Then she thought of the small white pill and how harmless it looked. That frightened her most. From somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Annie lifted her head. Dr. Reed had arrived. Dr. Samuel Reed did not enter the Whitmore estate like a man rushing into trouble. He entered like a man who had spent 40 years around illness and knew panic never made a diagnosis better. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair combed neatly back and a brown leather medical bag in his hand. His raincoat was damp at the shoulders. Caleb took it from him, and Dr. Reed gave Annie a brief nod as he passed the sitting room. Miss, he said. Annie sat up straighter. Good evening, sir. He paused for half a second, as if he noticed the tension in her face, then continued down the hall toward Ethan's office. The door closed behind him, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Annie kept both hands around the mug of tea, though it had cooled. She had eaten half the sandwich because Caleb had stood there until she did. The soup sat mostly untouched. Her stomach wanted food, but her nerves had turned against it. Across the room, a clock ticked with the steady confidence of expensive things. On a low table lay business magazines with Ethan Whitmore's face on the covers. In one, he stood beside the entrance of a hospital wing his foundation had funded. In another, he shook hands with a senator. Annie looked away. Men like him belonged in places where people listened. Girls like her were usually only noticed when someone wanted to blame them. The office door opened after several minutes. Caleb stepped out. Mr. Whitmore wants you to come in, he said. Annie wiped her palms on her skirt before standing. Did I do something wrong? Caleb's expression did not change much, but his voice gentled. No, ma'am. Just answer what the doctor asks. Inside the office, Ethan sat behind a wide desk, the amber bottle and pharmacy paper placed in front of him. Dr. Reed stood beside the desk, wearing reading glasses low on his nose. Harold was there too, near the bookcase, stiff as a man waiting for a verdict he had already prepared himself to fight. Ethan looked at Annie. Dr. Reed needs to hear how you found it. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. Dr. Reed picked up the pill between two gloved fingers and held it under the desk lamp. You said you recognized the marking? I noticed it didn't match the instruction sheet, Annie said. The paper described a small round tablet, pale yellow. with a different code. This one is white, and has a line across the middle with letters I don't remember seeing before. Dr. Reed looked at her over his glasses. You checked the sheet before bringing it to Mr. Briggs? Yes, sir. I didn't want to say anything unless I had a reason. Harold gave a soft sigh. Or unless you wanted to sound important. Ethan did not raise his voice. Harold, the warning was enough. Dr. Reed turned back to Annie. Your grandmother takes medication? Yes, sir. She has high blood pressure and diabetes. She used to take something that made her too sleepy. Her doctor changed it after she almost fell getting out of bed. That made you cautious. It made me afraid of mistakes, Annie said. For the first time, Dr. Reed's face softened. That is not a bad habit. He pulled a small magnifying lens from his bag and examined the pill again. Then, he took out his phone, opened a professional reference app, and typed in the imprint. The office went quiet except for the rain and the faint tapping of his finger on the screen. Annie watched Harold. He did not look at the phone. He looked at Ethan. Dr. Reed stopped typing. His eyes narrowed. What is it? Ethan asked. Dr. Reed did not answer immediately. He checked the bottle label, then the pill, then the screen again. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful. This is not the medication I prescribed. Ethan's face did not move, but his hand closed around the arm of his chair. Harold spoke too quickly. Could the pharmacy have substituted a generic? No, Dr. Reed said. A generic may look different, but it would match the active medication and dosage. This appears to be a stronger sleep medication, not what I prescribed as your evening sedative. The room changed. Annie felt it the way a person feels weather turn before thunder. Even Harold seemed to forget his performance for one dangerous second. Ethan leaned back, slowly. How strong? Strong enough that, if taken regularly, it could explain some of what you described these past weeks. Daytime drowsiness, confusion, slowed response, difficulty concentrating. Ethan looked at the bottle. You told me I was under stress. I believed you were, Dr. Reed said. You had every reason to be. But if this has been in your tray, then stress was not the whole story. Harold stepped forward. Sir, surely there must be a reasonable explanation. Ethan's eyes stayed on Dr. Reed. Would taking this harm me? Dr. Reed hesitated, and that hesitation said enough. With your medical history, yes, especially without supervision. It could increase your fall risk. It could affect your judgment. It could make you appear less capable than you are. Appear less capable. The words landed hard. Ethan looked toward the window. Annie saw something pass through him. Not fear exactly, but memory rearranging itself. Meetings where he had lost his place. Mornings when he had woken with a thick head and shame in his chest. Margaret's hand on his shoulder. Margaret's voice telling him he had done enough. Harold cleared his throat again. Mr. Whitmore, we should not jump to conclusions based on one pill. Ethan turned to him. One pill came from my bottle. We do not yet know how. No, Ethan said. We don't. Dr. Reed put the pill into a small evidence bag from his medical kit. I'll send this for confirmation, but I'm comfortable saying right now that Miss Carter was correct to raise concern. Annie looked down at the floor. Correct. It was such a simple word, but in that room it felt almost dangerous. Harold's jaw tightened. Correct by accident, perhaps. Dr. Reed looked at him. Accident or not, she may have prevented serious harm. Ethan stood then. He did it slowly, using the cane, but once upright he seemed taller than he had in the hallway. Harold, where are the rest of my recent medication deliveries? In the medicine cabinet, sir. All of them? Yes. Then bring the locked medication log. Harold did not move. Ethan's voice cooled. Now. Harold bowed his head and left the office. Caleb followed without being asked. The moment the door closed, Ethan let out a breath. For a few seconds, he looked less like a billionaire, and more like a man sitting in a room where his own body had become evidence. Dr. Reed lowered his voice. Ethan, until we know more, you are not to take anything from that cabinet. I'll prepare a replacement set myself. Do you think this was deliberate? I think mistakes happen, Dr. Reed said, but housekeepers do not usually threaten young women for noticing pharmacy mistakes. Ethan looked at Annie then. She wished he would not. Concern was almost harder to bear than anger. Anger let her defend herself. Concern made her remember she was tired. "Miss Carter," he said, "when Harold spoke to you before I arrived, did he seem surprised about the medicine?" Annie answered carefully. "Only for a second." "You saw that?" "Yes, sir." "What else did you see?" She hesitated. Ethan waited. "He didn't ask which pill," she said. "He didn't ask why I thought it was wrong. He just wanted me to stop talking." Dr. Reed's eyes moved to Ethan. Before either man could respond, the office door opened again. Harold returned carrying a black leather binder. Caleb stood behind him. Harold placed the binder on the desk with both hands. "There," he said. "Every dose recorded." Ethan opened it. The handwriting was neat, old-fashioned, controlled. Dates, times, initials. Harold's initials appeared again and again beside the evening tray. Dr. Reed leaned closer. "Who verified the tray after you prepared it?" "The nurse, when present," Harold said. "When present," Ethan repeated. Harold's face tightened. "Sir, your sister often asked that the evening routine be kept simple when you were tired." "My sister asked." "At times." Ethan looked up slowly. "How often?" Harold did not answer fast enough. A sound came from the hallway before anyone could press him further. Heels on hardwood, calm, measured. Familiar to everyone in the house except Annie. A woman's voice followed, smooth and concerned. "Ethan," Harold called and said there was some kind of disturbance. Margaret Whitmore appeared in the doorway wearing a cream coat and pearl earrings. Her silver blonde hair pinned perfectly despite the rain. Her eyes went first to Ethan, then Dr. Reed, then the bottle on the desk, and finally to Annie. The concern on her face thinned. "What is she doing in your office?" Margaret asked. Ethan closed the medication log. "She noticed something about my pills," he said. Margaret looked at Annie the way one might look at mud tracked onto a clean rug. "Did she?" "Yes," Ethan said, "and Dr. Reed says she was right." For one breath, the room became very still. Then Margaret smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but as if she had just found a crack she could cover with paint. "Well," she said, removing her gloves finger by finger, "then I suppose we should all be grateful. But Ethan, you must be careful. Young employees sometimes misunderstand the weight of what they say." Annie felt the old pressure return, the one that told her to shrink before someone powerful decided she had taken up too much space. Ethan did not look away from his sister. "The weight of this," he said, tapping the medicine log once, "is exactly what I intend to understand." Margaret's smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. And Annie, standing near the edge of that office with her cracked phone in her pocket and her grandmother's warning in her heart, knew that the wrong pill was only the beginning. Margaret Whitmore stepped farther into the office as if she had every right to rearrange the air inside it. She removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger, and laid them across the back of a chair. The gesture was small, but Annie noticed how everyone waited for her to finish before speaking. People in that house did not interrupt Margaret. Even the rain outside seemed quieter with her in the room. Ethan remained behind his desk, one hand resting near the medication log. "Harold called you?" Margaret gave a soft sigh. "He was concerned. He said there was confusion about your pills, and naturally I came as soon as I could." "Naturally," Ethan said. Her eyes flicked to Annie. "I'm sure this young woman meant well, but you've been under strain, Ethan. The last thing you need is staff alarming you over things they don't understand." Dr. Reed closed his medical bag. "Mrs. Whitmore, the pill in that bottle was not what I prescribed." Margaret looked at him then, her smile thinning but not breaking. "I'm not questioning your expertise, doctor. I'm questioning how a housemaid came to be involved in my brother's medical care." "I came to be involved because I found the wrong pill," Annie said before she could stop herself. The room turned toward her. Margaret's face did not change, but her eyes cooled. "And you are?" "Annie Carter, ma'am." "Yes, Harold mentioned you." Margaret looked Annie over, not openly rude, not enough for anyone to call it cruelty, but with the practiced judgment of a woman who could make a person feel unwelcome without raising her voice. "You're very young." "Yes, ma'am." "And you clean upstairs?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then perhaps in the future you should report housekeeping matters to Mr. Briggs and leave medical concerns to professionals." Annie felt the sting of it, but Dr. Reed spoke before she could answer. "She did report it." "That appears to be the problem." Harold's face tightened. Doctor, I don't appreciate the implication. Ethan opened the medication log again. No one asked what you appreciated, Harold. Margaret turned to her brother. Ethan, there was warning in the way she said his name, the kind family members use when they believe history gives them permission. He looked up. What? You're tired. You've traveled. You're upset. Let Samuel replace the medication, and we can discuss the rest in the morning. No. The word landed flat. Margaret folded her hands. No, Ethan repeated. My pills were changed. My head has been foggy for weeks. I've lost track of meetings. I've nearly fallen twice. I have had people telling me I need to step back from my own company because I'm no longer steady. Now I'm told the medication in my room may have caused that, and the person who noticed was threatened into silence. Margaret's gaze went to Harold. Only for a second. Annie saw it. So did Ethan. Harold lowered his eyes. Margaret recovered. Threatened is a strong word. So is harm. Ethan said. Ethan, be careful. With what? My health? My staff? My own sister? A silence followed that felt older than the conversation. Annie stood near the side of the desk, wanting to disappear and knowing she could not. Harold had already put her in the middle of it. Margaret was trying to push her back out. Ethan, for reasons Annie did not fully understand, was refusing to let that happen. Dr. Reed cleared his throat. For tonight, Ethan should not take anything from the current tray or cabinet. I'll prepare new medication myself and send the sample for confirmation. I also recommend checking the remaining bottles against the pharmacy records. Do that, Ethan said. Margaret gave a small laugh, but it carried no humor. Are we turning the house into an investigation now? Ethan looked at Nora's missed call flashing on his phone, then back at his sister. Yes. Margaret's smile faded. The office phone rang before she could answer. Ethan picked it up and put it on speaker. Nora, he said. Nora Ellis's voice came through clear and brisk. Mr. Whitmore, Caleb said it was urgent. It is. I need the last 48 hours of security footage preserved for my bedroom hall, the medicine room, the staff corridor, and any entrance used for pharmacy deliveries. I also want access logs for the medication cabinet and a list of everyone who entered my suite this week. Margaret stared at him. Ethan, this is excessive. Nora paused. Mrs. Whitmore is present? Yes, Ethan said. Understood. I'll proceed carefully. Proceed thoroughly. Yes, sir. He ended the call. Harold shifted near the bookcase. Mr. Whitmore, surely you do not suspect your own household of criminal conduct. I suspect my medicine was changed, Ethan said. That is enough. Margaret stepped closer to the desk. And what about the girl? Has anyone asked why she was handling your pills in the first place? Annie's fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. Ethan answered before she could. She was cleaning the room she was assigned to clean, and touching a medicine bottle, to read a label, or to create a story. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Annie looked at Margaret. I didn't create anything, ma'am. Margaret's gaze sharpened. You should remember where you are. For a moment, Annie was back in the hallway with Harold's finger in her face. She could hear him again. People from places like yours. Stealing and lying. Filthy little liar. She wanted to lower her head. It would be easier, safer. People like Margaret did not need to shout. They could ruin a person while sounding disappointed. But Miss Evelyn's voice came back, steady as a hand on her shoulder. Stand straight. Annie lifted her chin. I do remember where I am. I'm in the house of a man whose medicine was wrong. Dr. Reed looked down, hiding the smallest hint of approval. Caleb, standing near the door, did not move, but Annie felt him watching Harold more closely now. Margaret's mouth tightened. Ethan, are you going to allow this? Ethan's answer was calm. I asked her to speak. You asked a frightened child to speak about matters beyond her understanding. I'm 18, Annie said. Margaret turned on her. That does not make you grown. No, ma'am, Annie said. But it makes me old enough to know when someone is trying to scare me out of telling the truth. The office went still. Harold's expression hardened. Margaret looked as if Annie had slapped her, though Annie had not raised her voice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes on Annie now with something that looked like recognition, not of who she was, but of what it cost her to stand there. Dr. Reed broke the silence. "I'll need the rest of the medication." Ethan nodded. "Caleb, take him to the cabinet. Harold will remain here." Harold's head lifted. "Sir, you heard me. I have always supervised medical storage, and tonight you won't." Caleb opened the office door for Dr. Reed. As they left, Harold watched them go with a stiffness that made Annie uneasy. He looked less like a servant accused of negligence and more like a man whose hiding place had been disturbed. Margaret moved to the window, her back to the room. Outside, the rain had turned the glass into a gray mirror. "You're making a mistake," she said. Ethan did not answer. "You're letting exhaustion turn you suspicious." Still he said nothing. She turned around. "You know what the board is already saying. Preston told me 2 members asked whether you were pushing yourself too hard." Ethan's face changed. It was subtle, but Annie saw the wound open. "The board discussed my health? They care about stability. Did you bring it up?" Margaret held his gaze. "I answered questions. Did you bring it up?" Her silence answered. Ethan closed the medication log slowly. "You scheduled next week's executive session. For your protection. For my replacement. That is not fair." "No," Ethan said, his voice low. "What isn't fair is learning that people have been measuring my weakness, while someone may have been helping create it." Margaret took that in. For the first time, Annie saw real anger under the polished surface. "You should be careful what you imply." "I am." A knock came at the door. Caleb returned with Dr. Reed. The doctor carried 3 more bottles in a clear plastic bag. "These need to be checked," Dr. Reed said. 2 look correct, 1 does not." Ethan's eyes closed briefly. "Annie fait stomach. Harold spoke too fast. "That is impossible." Dr. Reed looked at him. "It is not." Margaret crossed her arms. "Could a pharmacy error affect more than 1 bottle?" "It could," Dr. Reed said, "but not usually with this pattern." "What pattern?" Ethan asked. Dr. Reed placed the bag on the desk. "Only the evening medications appear questionable. The ones most likely to make you sleep." No one moved. Then Ethan looked at Harold. "Who prepares my evening tray?" Harold swallowed. "I do." "And who requested the nurse stop coming every night?" Harold glanced toward Margaret before he could stop himself. That single glance changed the room. Margaret's voice cut in. "I suggested reducing unnecessary expense and disruption." Ethan hated having a nurse fuss over him every evening. Ethan stared at her. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "You were tired," she said. He laughed once, without humor. "I'm beginning to understand why." Annie felt suddenly aware of her own breathing. This was no longer about 1 bottle or 1 insult in a hallway. This was a net, and each answer pulled another knot into view. Dr. Reed gathered his bag. "Ethan, I'll prepare tonight's dose myself. I want you monitored. No alcohol, no sedatives, and no medication from the house supply until I verify every bottle." "Do it," Ethan said. Margaret stepped forward again. "I'll stay with him tonight." "No," Ethan said. The words stopped her. "I beg your pardon? You heard me. I am your sister, and Miss Carter is the one who noticed what my sister did not." Margaret's face hardened. Harold looked at the floor. Annie wished Ethan had not said it that way. It put a target on her she could almost feel. Ethan seemed to realize it too. He turned to Caleb. "Have someone drive Miss Carter home when Dr. Reed is done speaking with her." "Not the bus. A car." Annie shook her head. "Sir, that isn't necessary. It is tonight." Margaret gave a cold smile. "How generous." Ethan looked at her. "How decent." That silenced her more effectively than anger would have. Dr. Reed asked Annie a few more questions about the first pill, the tray, the drawer, and what Harold said. She answered as plainly as she could. When she finished, Ethan thanked her again, but this time his voice carried more weight. "You may have saved me from more than a bad night's sleep." Annie did not know what to say to that. "I just didn't want you taking the wrong medicine. That is more than some people did." Margaret picked up her gloves from the chair. "I won't stay where I'm being insulted." "No one asked you to," Ethan said. She walked to the door, then paused beside Annie. Her perfume was light, expensive, and cold. "You should be very sure of yourself, Miss Carter," Margaret said. "Accusations have consequences." Annie looked at her, afraid but steady. "So does medicine." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Then she left. Harold remained in the office, but his power had changed. Earlier he had filled the hallway with his voice. Now he stood under Ethan's stare like a man waiting for a door to close behind him. Ethan looked at Caleb. "Make sure Mrs. Whitmore leaves the property." "Yes, sir." "And Harold stays in the library until Nora arrives." Harold opened his mouth. Ethan raised a hand. Not another word. Caleb moved toward him. Harold had no choice but to follow. When they were gone, Annie stood in the office with Ethan and Dr. Reed. The room felt larger now, emptier. Ethan lowered himself into his chair, suddenly looking his age again. Dr. Reed checked his pulse and spoke quietly. "This will need to be handled carefully." Ethan looked at the door where Margaret had stood. Careful is how this happened. Annie thought of the pill bottles, the tray, the nurse dismissed, the sister who smiled too late and watched too closely. She thought of Harold's whisper, "You have no idea what you've done." He was right. She had no idea. Not yet. But as Caleb later walked her to the waiting car, Annie looked back at Whitmore Estate, through the rain. The windows glowed warm against the dark, beautiful from the outside, unknowable within. Somewhere inside that house, a man was learning that betrayal could wear a familiar face. Somewhere else, Harold Briggs was waiting with his anger locked behind polished manners. And Annie, with her cracked phone and empty stomach and grandmother waiting at home, understood one thing clearly. By telling the truth, she had stepped into a war that had started long before she arrived. The car Ethan sent was a black Lincoln with soft leather seats, and a driver who kept his eyes politely on the road. Annie sat in the back with her hands folded over her bag, watching Buckhead's gated streets slide past the window in streaks of rain and porch light. She had ridden buses all her life. She knew the rhythm of standing too close to strangers, of counting stops, of keeping one hand on her purse and one eye on the time. Sitting alone in a quiet car felt almost wrong, like she had borrowed a life meant for someone else. The driver asked once if she was warm enough. Annie said yes, even though her fingers were still cold. By the time she reached the old brick apartment building in South Atlanta, the rain had slowed to a mist. The Lincoln stopped at the curb, and Annie saw the curtain in their second-floor window move. Miss Evelyn had been watching. "Thank you," Annie told the driver. "Yes, ma'am," he said. That ma'am followed her up the stairs. It stayed with her as she unlocked the door and stepped into the small apartment that smelled of peppermint tea, fried onions, and the lavender ointment her grandmother rubbed into her knees at night. Miss Evelyn Carter sat at the kitchen table in her robe, her gray hair wrapped in a scarf, her pill organizer open in front of her. The television was on low, some local news anchor talking about traffic on I-85, but Evelyn's eyes were fixed on Annie. "Sit down," she said. Annie shut the door. "Grandma, I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine, I said sit down." Annie sat. Evelyn reached across the table and took her hand, turning it over as if checking for bruises that might have formed under the skin. "He put his hands on you?" "No. Just got close. Close enough to make you scared?" Annie looked away. "That's what I thought." Evelyn let go and leaned back, breathing a little harder than she wanted Annie to notice. "Tell me all of it." So Annie did. She told her about the bottle, Harold's finger in her face, the things he said, Ethan walking in, Dr. Reed checking the pill, Margaret arriving in her cream coat with her smooth voice and cold eyes. She told it carefully, because Miss Evelyn did not like stories dressed up. She liked the truth with its work clothes still on. When Annie finished, Evelyn sat quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That woman's in it." Annie blinked. "Grandma, I'm old, not blind. We don't know that." "No. You don't know that. But I heard enough." Evelyn tapped the open pill organizer with one bent finger. "Medicine don't change itself. Nurses don't get sent away by accident. And men like that Harold don't panic unless somebody bigger than him is holding the other end of the rope." Annie rubbed her forehead. The apartment suddenly felt too small for what had followed her home. "I wish I never saw it." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." The words came out sharper than she meant. "If I hadn't seen it, I'd still have my job without all this. Harold already hates me." Margaret looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. "What if they say I stole something? What if they call the school? What if Mr. Whitmore changes his mind tomorrow and believes them?" Evelyn's face softened, but her voice did not. "Baby, fear asks a lot of questions. Most of them lie." Annie stared at the table. "You did what you were supposed to do," Evelyn said. That don't mean it'll be easy. It means you'll be able to look at yourself when it's over. Annie's eyes burned. I need that job. I know. We need my paycheck. I know that too. I can't fight people like them. Evelyn reached for her tea, took a small sip, and set the cup down. You already did. Annie did not answer. The next morning, she woke before her alarm. She had slept badly, waking every hour to check her phone as if a message might appear telling her not to come back. None did. At 6:30, she dressed in her uniform, packed her nursing textbook into her bag, and ate toast standing by the counter while Evelyn measured her blood sugar. You going to class first? Evelyn asked. Yes, ma'am. Then work. If they let you work. Annie paused. Evelyn looked up. Don't flinch. I'm not cursing you. I'm preparing you. At community college, Annie tried to listen while her instructor reviewed medication safety. The topic felt almost cruel. The class discussed 5 rights. Right patient, right medication, right dose, right time, right route. Annie copied each word into her notebook, pressing the pen harder than usual. Her friend Tasha leaned over. You okay? Long night. Work? Annie nodded. Tasha studied her. That rich house? Yeah. Girl. Rich people trouble pays the same as poor people trouble? Not enough. Tasha almost smiled, then saw Annie's face and stopped. For real? You good? Annie wanted to tell her. She wanted someone her own age to say it was crazy, to make Harold smaller by laughing at him. But the story was too dangerous now, and Annie did not know where the edges were. I'm good, she said. After class, she took the bus to Buckhead. Every mile north felt like moving between worlds. Corner stores became coffee shops. Cracked sidewalks became landscaped medians. Apartment blocks gave way to homes with gates, then bigger gates, then Whitmore Estate rising behind black iron as if nothing ugly could ever happen there. At the service entrance, the security guard, Mr. Lewis, looked at her differently. Not rude, just curious. Afternoon, Miss Carter. Miss Carter again. Afternoon. Mr. Whitmore said you're to go straight to the side office when you arrive, not the staff room. Annie's stomach tightened. Did he say why? No, Mom. Inside, the house felt changed. People lowered their voices when she passed. A maid from the laundry room gave her a quick, sympathetic glance, then looked away. The cook, Mrs. Alvarez, touched Annie's arm as she passed the kitchen. You eat today? Mrs. Alvarez asked. Yes, ma'am. That means no. She wrapped a biscuit in a napkin and pressed it into Annie's hand. Put it in your pocket. Annie wanted to thank her, but her throat closed. She nodded and kept walking. The side office was small, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window facing the wet garden. Caleb stood outside the door, like he had been waiting. Mr. Whitmore's with Nora, he said. They'll call you in soon. Am I in trouble? Caleb shook his head. Not from him. That was not as comforting as it should have been. From down the hall came Harold's voice. Annie could not hear the words, only the tone. Controlled, offended, wounded, in a way meant to be heard. Then Nora Ellis answered, crisp and calm. A few minutes later, the office door opened. Nora stepped out first. She was in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back and a tablet tucked under one arm. Her suit was simple, her expression unreadable. Annie Carter? Yes, ma'am. I'm Nora Ellis, Mr. Whitmore's legal counsel. I need to ask you a few questions and write down your answers. You're not being accused of anything. Annie nodded, but the word legal made her hands go cold. Nora seemed to notice. You're allowed to be nervous. Just don't guess. If you know, say you know. If you don't, say you don't. Inside Ethan's office, he sat beside the desk instead of behind it, as if he did not want the furniture making him look farther away. He wore a navy sweater over a collared shirt. His cane leaned against his chair. He looked clearer than the night before, though tiredness still sat in his face. Miss Carter, he said, thank you for coming back. Annie almost said she had nowhere else to go, but stopped herself. Yes, sir. Harold stood near the bookcase again. He did not look at Annie at first. When he did, his eyes held the same warning as before, only better hidden. Nora placed the tablet on the desk. Let's begin with yesterday. What time were you assigned to Mr. Whitmore's room? Annie answered. She gave times as closely as she could remember. She explained the linens, the bathroom counter, the medicine tray, the instruction sheet, the pill marking. Nora asked if anyone else entered the room while Annie was there. Annie said no. Nora asked whether Annie had touched any other bottle. Annie said no. Nora asked whether Harold had taken the bottle from her at any point. Annie hesitated. Harold spoke. Careful. Ethan's head turned. Do not speak to her. Annie swallowed. Yes, he took it from me when I first showed him. Nora looked up. For how long? Maybe a minute. Less than that. Then he gave it back after he told me to stop making trouble. Harold's face reddened. That is not what I said. Nora typed without looking at him. You'll have your turn. The words were plain. But Annie felt their power. In this room, for once, Harold did not own the order of things. Nora continued. Did Mr. Briggs mention calling Dr. Reed? No, ma'am. Did he ask why you believed the pill was wrong? No. What did he ask? Annie looked at her hands. He asked what I knew about medicine. And after that, Annie's voice dropped. He said people from places like mine steal and lie. The room went still. Ethan's face hardened in a way that frightened even Annie, though the anger was not aimed at her. Nora stopped typing for the first time. Exact words matter. Is that as close as you can remember? Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Harold let out a breath. This is becoming theatrical. Ethan rose slowly, one hand on the chair. No, Harold. It is becoming clear. Before Harold could answer, Caleb knocked once and opened the door. Sir, he said, looking at Ethan. Dr. Reed's lab courier just picked up the pill sample. Also, security found something on the delivery entrance camera. Harold went very still. Nora picked up her tablet. What kind of something? Caleb's eyes moved briefly to Annie, then back to Ethan. Yesterday morning, he said. Before Miss Carter ever entered your room, Mr. Briggs received a pharmacy package at the side entrance. But he wasn't alone. Ethan's voice was quiet. Who was with him? Caleb looked toward Harold. Mrs. Whitmore. Harold's face did not change at first. That was what made it frightening. He did not gasp, did not deny, did not even look toward the door, as if Margaret might appear and rescue him. He simply stood there, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot above Caleb's shoulder. Ethan looked at Caleb. Show me. Caleb stepped inside and handed Nora a tablet. Nora connected it to the office screen with the quick, practiced movements of someone who had done this in courtrooms and conference rooms before. A few seconds later, the delivery entrance appeared on the wall monitor. The image was all or enough, due to Fordu. A delivery driver in a navy jacket handed him a white pharmacy. Harold signed the digital pad, then glanced toward the hall. A moment later, Margaret Whitmore walked into frame. Annie heard Ethan inhale. Margaret wore the same cream coat she had worn the night before, though on the video she had a silk scarf around her hair and dark glasses on her face. She did not look like a woman passing by. She looked like a woman who expected to be there. Harold handed her the pharmacy bag. She opened it, removed something small, then gave the bag back to him. The video had no sound, but the silence in the office supplied its own. Nora paused the footage. Timestamp is 9:14 a.m. Yesterday, Ethan did not move. My medication was delivered yesterday morning. Harold swallowed. Yes, sir. And you did not mention my sister receiving it? She didn't receive it. She only looked at it. Nora turned from the screen. She removed something from the bag. I cannot say what she removed. You were standing beside her. Harold's voice tightened. It was not my place to question Mrs. Whitmore. Ethan looked at him. But it was your place to threaten Annie for questioning you. Harold said nothing. Annie stood near the chair, feeling like the floor had shifted under everyone except Nora, who kept her attention on the facts. Annie had expected Harold to deny everything. She had not expected proof to arrive so quickly, and she did not trust it to protect her yet. Proof could be twisted. She had seen that happen in small ways all her life. Ethan pointed to the screen. Play the rest. Nora did. Margaret spoke to Harold for nearly a minute. Harold nodded twice. Then she touched his sleeve, a light gesture, almost friendly. After she left, Harold looked around, opened the pharmacy bag again, and walked toward the interior hallway. Nora stopped the video. From there, he went toward your suite. The interior camera picks him up 3 minutes later. Let me see it, Ethan said. The next clip showed Harold entering Ethan's private hall. He carried the pharmacy bag in one hand and a black leather medication log in the other. He disappeared into the bedroom. How long was he inside? Ethan asked. 7 minutes, Nora said. Harold's voice came out dry. I was putting away your medication. As I always do. Nora looked at him. The delivery bag appears thinner when you leave. Harold's jaw tightened. Ethan turned from the screen. Where is my sister now? Caleb answered. At her townhouse, according to the gate log. She left the estate last night at 7:42 p.m. Call her. Harold lifted his head. Sir, I would strongly advise against escalating this before the lab result returns. Ethan stared at him. Your advice has become less valuable. Nora took out her phone. I can place the call. Ethan shook his head. Use mine. He dialed Margaret himself and put it on speaker. It rang 4 times before she answered. Ethan, Margaret said. I was about to call you. Have you calmed down? Annie saw Ethan's face close. No, he said. We reviewed the delivery entrance footage. A pause. Small but there. What footage? The one showing you opening my pharmacy delivery yesterday morning. Margaret gave a soft laugh. For heaven's sake, is that all? Harold told me your new prescription had arrived. I checked the label because you've been careless lately. Dr. Reed, who had remained quiet near the window, looked at Ethan but did not interrupt. Ethan said, You removed something from the bag. I removed the receipt. It had my card listed for a copay from a prior order. I didn't want staff seeing personal billing details. Nora wrote something on her tablet. Ethan's voice stayed level. Why didn't you say that last night? Because last night you were allowing a maid to turn your home into a courtroom. Annie felt the word maid land exactly where Margaret meant it to. Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone. Her name is Annie Carter. Yes, and I'm sure Miss Carter has enjoyed feeling important, but this is getting out of hand. You are ill, Ethan. You're not thinking clearly. Because someone may have made sure of that. Another silence. When Margaret spoke again, the softness was gone from the edges. Be very careful. I am being careful. That's why Nora is reviewing the pharmacy records, access logs, and security footage. Dr. Reed is verifying every pill in this house. You're embarrassing yourself. No, Ethan said. I'm beginning to remember myself. Margaret's voice dropped. You need family right now, not employees whispering in your ear. The employee you keep dismissing may have saved my life, or she may have found a way into your sympathy. Ethan looked at Annie then. She wished he would not, but there was no pity in his eyes. Only apology, and something like resolve. Goodbye, Margaret, he said. Ethan, do not hang up on blankplanks.org. He ended the call. The office stayed quiet after that. Rain moved down the windows in crooked lines. Dr. Reed walked back to the desk and placed a hand near the evidence bag. Not touching it. Her explanation is possible, he said. But not satisfying. Nora nodded. I'll confirm whether any receipt was missing from the delivery records. I'll also request pharmacy packing images if they have them. Do it, Ethan said, and find out who paid for every medication delivered in the last 3 months. Harold's eyes moved. Annie caught it. Nora caught Annie catching it. Mr. Briggs, Nora said, you look concerned again. I am concerned that this household has become hostile to loyal service. Ethan let out a short breath. Loyal service does not fear inspection. Harold's lips pressed together. Nora tapped the tablet. There's another issue. The medication cabinet access log shows entries at odd hours. 3 nights this month. After midnight. Ethan looked at Harold. By whose code? His, Nora said. Harold answered quickly. I often check the house before retiring. If I noticed the cabinet was not secure, I would correct it. At 1:37 in the morning? Nora asked. I take my duties seriously. Then you won't object to explaining each entry. I don't remember each entry. Convenient, Caleb said quietly. Harold turned toward him. I beg your pardon? Caleb did not raise his voice. I said convenient. Ethan looked at Nora. Preserve those logs too. Already done. Annie felt a strange pressure behind her eyes. Not tears exactly. The feeling was too mixed for that. Fear, exhaustion, relief, and the ugly knowledge that Harold would hate her more with every piece of evidence that appeared. She had not created the footage. She had not opened the cabinet after midnight. Yet somehow, she knew he would still see her as the reason his world was cracking. Dr. Reed checked his watch. "Ethan, I need to examine you again and prepare safe medication for tonight." Ethan nodded. In a moment, he looked at Annie. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology." Annie froze. "Sir? Last night, I thanked you. That wasn't enough. You were insulted in my house for trying to protect my health. That should never have happened." Harold stared at the wall. Annie did not know where to put her hands. "I only said what I saw. That's more than many people do." The words were simple, but they reached a tired place in her. She thought of Miss Evelyn at the kitchen table, telling her not to apologize for having eyes. Nora closed her tablet. "For now, Miss Carter should not be questioned by anyone without me present. That includes staff." Harold gave a bitter smile. "So the maid has legal protection now?" Ethan's voice cut through the room. "Say one more word about her like that, and you will leave this house before dinner." Harold went pale. No one had ever spoken to him that way in front of Annie. Ethan turned to Caleb. "Escort Mr. Briggs to the library. He is not to access the staff corridor, the medicine room, or my suite." Harold looked as if he wanted to protest, but Caleb had already stepped beside him. "This way," Caleb said. Harold walked to the door. Just before leaving, he looked back at Annie. His face held no rage now, only calculation. That frightened her more. When he was gone, Ethan sat down heavily. Dr. Reed moved toward him at once, but Ethan held up a hand. "Give me a second." Nora turned to Annie. "You did well." Annie shook her head. "I don't feel like I did. You told the truth in a room where people were paid, trained, or raised not to hear it. That counts." Annie looked toward the closed door. "What happens now?" Ethan answered before Nora could. "Now we find out how long this has been happening." Dr. Reed adjusted his glasses. "And who benefited from making you appear weak?" Ethan's face went still. Everyone in that room knew the answer beginning to form. But no one said Preston's name yet. A phone buzzed on Nora's tablet. She read the notification, then looked up. "The pharmacy can provide purchase and delivery records, but there's something else. One of the questionable medications was not filled through your regular pharmacy." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Where was it filled? Nora hesitated only long enough for Annie to feel the next door opening. "A private pharmacy in Savannah," she said. "Paid through a consulting account connected to Preston Vale." Ethan stared at her. For the first time since Annie had met him, the billionaire looked less angry than broken. Then his hand closed around the head of his cane. "Call my nephew," he said. Preston Vale answered on the second call, which told Annie he had been waiting near his phone. "Uncle Ethan," he said, too bright, too quick. "I heard there was some confusion at the house. Mom said you were upset." Ethan looked at Nora, then at the phone lying on the desk between them. "I asked you a question, Preston. I expect a direct answer." There was a pause. "All right. Why is a medication that was not prescribed to me being filled through a consulting account connected to your company?" Silence. "Not long, but long enough." "I'm sorry," Preston said. "What medication?" Nora slid her tablet closer to Ethan, showing him the record again. Ethan read from it. "Private pharmacy in Savannah. Paid through Vale Advisory Group. Picked up 3 weeks ago. Same drug Dr. Reed just found in my evening medication." Preston gave a small laugh. "That must be some kind of bookkeeping error. Vale Advisory pays for a lot of things. Vendors, retainers, health plans. I'd have to ask accounting." "Ask yourself first," Ethan said. "Uncle Ethan, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say whether you purchased drugs that ended up in my house." "That sounds insane." "Yes," Ethan said. "It does." Annie stood near the window, trying to keep her breathing quiet. She had never heard a rich family argument before. Poor families fought close, hot, with bills on the table and neighbors on the other side of thin walls. This was different. Every word wore a suit. Every pause had a lawyer hiding inside it. Preston's voice changed. Less bright now. "Who is telling you this?" "That maid?" Ethan looked at the phone as if Preston had stepped into the room and shown his face. "Her name is Annie Carter." "All right, Annie Carter. But you're seriously letting some girl who cleans your bathroom accuse your family? Dr. Reed removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Nora's mouth became a straight line. Ethan's voice stayed low. My doctor identified the pill. My counsel found the purchase record. My security footage shows Margaret handling my pharmacy delivery. Harold was caught lying about the delivery. So no, Preston, this is not coming from the girl who cleans my bathroom. Another pause. Then Preston said, You're tired. Mom said you've been confused lately. Ethan's hand tightened around the cane. That excuse is no longer available. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Preston exhaled sharply. Look, I'll come by and we can talk. No, you will not come to my house tonight. That's a little dramatic. You will preserve all company and personal records related to Vale Advisory Group, any pharmacy purchase, any payment to Harold Briggs, and any communication with your mother about my health. Preston laughed once, but it broke in the middle. Are you threatening me? I am informing you before Nora does. Nora leaned toward the phone. Mr. Vale, this is Nora Ellis. Consider this verbal notice. Written preservation letters will follow. Do not delete, alter, transfer, or conceal any records. Preston went quiet. When he spoke again, the nephew was gone. What remained sounded colder, older. You really want to drag the family through this? Ethan looked at the dark glass of the window, where his own reflection looked back at him. I did not put my family in this position. Preston said nothing. Ethan ended the call. No one moved for several seconds. Annie could hear the soft hum of the office lights and the rain slipping through the gutters outside. Dr. Reed broke the silence. You need rest. Ethan gave a tired smile. That seems to be everyone's favorite recommendation. This time it comes without poison. Annie looked down before anyone saw the shock cross her face. Dr. Reed had said it plainly. Poison. Not in the dramatic way people used the word on television, but in the quiet way an old doctor used the correct term for something given to a person to make him less himself. Ethan heard it too. His face tightened. Nora stood. I'll have formal letters prepared tonight. I also want copies of the board calendar, especially any recent meetings about succession. Ethan looked up. Succession? You said Margaret has been telling people you should step back. If Preston's account is tied to the medication, and there's a board move coming, those timelines matter. Ethan leaned back slowly. There is an executive session next week. Who requested it? Margaret. Nora did not look surprised. Topic? Leadership continuity. Health contingency planning. Preston's name did not need to be spoken. It sat in the room anyway. Annie felt like she should not be there. This was company business now. Family business. Legal business. She took one small step toward the door. Ethan noticed. Miss Carter. She stopped. Yes, sir? You don't need to stay for every detail. Caleb will take your statement and drive you home. Annie nodded, relieved and worried at the same time. Yes, sir. He hesitated. I'm sorry this has followed you further than it should have. Annie did not know how to answer. Finally, she said, I just hope you'll be all right. That seemed to affect him more than she expected. He looked away for a moment. So do I. Caleb was waiting outside the office. He led Annie down the hall, not toward the front entrance but toward a smaller sitting room near the back stairs. Nora wants your statement written while it's fresh, he said. Then I'll take you home myself. You don't have to. I know. He handed her a yellow legal pad and a pen. Write what you remember. Times, words, anything you saw. Don't worry about sounding fancy. Annie almost smiled. I don't usually sound fancy. Good. Fancy gets in the way. She sat at the small desk and began to write. Her hand shook at first, but steadied as the facts found order. The room number, the tray, the bottle, the pill. Harold's first reaction. His insults, Ethan arriving. Dr. Reed's confirmation, Margaret's arrival. Preston's call. When she wrote the line Harold had spoken about people from places like hers, she stopped. The pen hovered above the paper. Caleb, standing by the window, did not turn around. Write it, Annie swallowed. It sounds ugly. It was ugly when he said it. She wrote it. By the time she finished, her wrist ached. Caleb read the statement once, asked her to add the exact time she arrived for her shift, then had her sign the bottom. "Can I ask you something?" Annie said. Caleb folded the paper carefully. "Depends. How long have you worked for Mr. Whitmore?" 12 years. "Do you think his sister would really do something like that?" Caleb looked toward the hall. He was quiet so long Annie thought he might not answer. "I've seen good people do bad things for fear," he said. "And I've seen bad people call greed by prettier names. That's not really an answer." "No," Caleb said. "It's the only honest one I've got." As he drove her home, Atlanta passed by in dark reflections. Gas stations, church signs, wet roads, brake lights. Annie leaned her forehead against the cool window and thought about Preston's voice. He had called her that maid as if her name was too much effort for his mouth. Margaret had looked at her the same way. Harold had said it worse. 3 different people. Same message. Stay small. When Caleb pulled up to her building, he reached into his coat and handed her a card. "My number," he said. "If Harold contacts you, if anyone from that house comes near you, if somebody calls your school or your grandmother, you call me first." Annie held the card. "Do you think they will?" "I think people panic when money and power start slipping." She nodded, though fear moved through her again. At the apartment, Miss Evelyn was waiting with the porch light on and a skillet of warmed cornbread on the stove. She listened as Annie told her about Preston and the Savannah pharmacy. Evelyn did not interrupt. When Annie finished, the old woman took off her glasses and set them beside her pillbox. "That boy knew," Evelyn said. "You don't know that. I know the sound of somebody pretending not to know." Annie sat across from her, suddenly exhausted. "Grandma, what if they don't stop? Then you don't start lying just because they keep going." Annie covered her face with her hands. "I'm scared. I'd be worried if you weren't." That made Annie lower her hands. Evelyn reached across the table. "Courage ain't the absence of fear. It's doing right with your knees shaking." Annie looked at her grandmother's hand, the veins raised under thin skin, the fingers bent from work and age. Those hands had bathed strangers, changed sheets, cooked meals, sorted pills, and held Annie through every hard season of her life. "I just wanted to go to school," Annie whispered. "You still will. What if this ruins everything?" Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Or what if it opens something?" Annie had no answer. The next morning, her phone buzzed before sunrise. A message from an unknown number appeared on the cracked screen. "You should have stayed quiet." No name, no punctuation, just 7 words. Annie sat up in bed, heart pounding. Across the room, Miss Evelyn stirred. "What is it?" Annie stared at the message until the letters blurred. Then she reached for Caleb's card. Annie called Caleb before she let herself think too long. He answered on the first ring, his voice low and alert. "Miss Carter? It's Annie. I'm sorry it's early. What happened?" She looked at the message again. The words seemed colder now that she had someone to read them to. "I got a text. It says, 'You should have stayed quiet.'" Miss Evelyn had pushed herself upright in bed, one hand already reaching for her glasses. Caleb did not ask if Annie was sure. He did not tell her it was probably nothing. He asked, "What number?" Annie read it to him. "Don't respond. Screenshot it. Send it to me and Nora. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You don't have to come here." "Yes, I do." The call ended. Annie sat still on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, while morning light slowly found the thin curtains. Their apartment was small enough that fear had nowhere to hide. It sat on the dresser, the kitchen counter, the chair where her uniform hung, the pill organizer on the table. Miss Evelyn rose carefully and came to her. "Let me see." Annie handed her the phone. Evelyn read the message once, then handed it back. "They're scared," she said. Annie almost laughed, but nothing came out. "Grandma, I'm the one shaking. They can be scared and still dangerous." That was the part Annie already knew. She dressed for class because she did not know what else to do. She brushed her hair back, washed her face, and tried to make herself look like a person who had not woken up to a threat. Miss Evelyn made oatmeal and sliced half a banana over it, the way she did when money was tight, but she still wanted breakfast to feel cared for. "You're eating," Evelyn said. "I can't." "You are." Annie ate 3 spoonfuls because arguing with her grandmother before sunrise took more strength than fear had left her. Caleb arrived in an old gray SUV instead of the Lincoln. He wore a dark jacket and stood at the door like a man checking corners, even in a hallway that smelled of laundry soap and boiled coffee. Miss Evelyn let him in and looked him over. "You the driver?" "Yes, ma'am." "Caleb Brooks." "You carrying a gun?" Annie's eyes widened. "Grandma." Caleb did not flinch. "Not inside your home, ma'am." Evelyn nodded once. "Good answer." He turned to Annie. "Nora traced the number already. It's prepaid, probably bought with cash. That doesn't mean we can't use it. The message creates a record. Do you think Harold sent it? I think Harold wants you afraid. Whether he used his own hand, we'll find out." Annie folded her arms. "I still have class." Caleb looked at Evelyn, then back at Annie. "Mr. Whitmore said you're not to lose a day of school because of this. I'll drive you." "I can take the bus." "I know. Today you won't." The community college parking lot was still wet from the rain, and students hurried across the pavement with backpacks over their heads. Caleb parked near the entrance and gave Annie the same instruction twice. "Stay where people can see you. Call if anything feels wrong. And do not answer unknown numbers." Annie nodded, embarrassed and grateful. In class, medication safety continued, as if the world had decided to mock her. The instructor held up a plastic sample bottle and asked the class what they checked before administering any drug. Students answered from their notes. Patient, dose, time, route, medication. Annie wrote the words again even though she already knew them. Right patient, right medication, right dose, right time, right route. She wondered how many people in fine houses forgot that care was not paperwork. It was attention. It was humility. It was being willing to believe a small warning before it became a large tragedy. After class, Tasha followed her into the hallway. "Okay, no. You look like you spent the night arguing with ghosts." Annie tried to smile. "Something like that." "Is it work?" Annie kept walking. "I can't really talk about it." "That means yes." "Tasha." Her friend softened. "All right, just tell me if you need a ride, money, somebody cursed out, anything." Despite everything, Annie laughed once. "I'll keep the last one in mind." By noon, Caleb was waiting outside. He drove her straight to Whitmore Estate. At the gate, the guard checked his clipboard and waved them in, but Annie noticed 2 security staff near the side entrance instead of 1. "Mr. Whitmore added people?" she asked. For now, inside the house, the staff moved differently. The usual rhythm had broken. The cook kept her radio off. The laundry room door was closed. A florist delivered white roses for a luncheon that had been canceled and left confused when no one knew where to put them. Caleb led Annie not to the staff area but to Ethan's office. Nora was already there, seated with her laptop open and 3 folders spread across the desk. Ethan stood near the window with Dr. Reed beside him, checking his blood pressure. "You got the message?" Ethan asked. Annie nodded. "I'm sorry. You didn't send it, sir." "No, but my house gave someone reason to think they could." Dr. Reed removed the cuff from Ethan's arm. "Blood pressure is better than yesterday." "Still high." Ethan gave him a look. "Imagine that." Nora turned her laptop slightly toward Annie. "We need to document the text in your statement. After that, I want to show you a few images from security footage. Not to lead you. If you recognize anything, say so. If not, say so." Annie sat. Her knees felt steadier than they had that morning. Nora showed the first image. Harold at the delivery entrance with Margaret. Annie had already heard about it, but seeing it made the story harder to dismiss. Margaret's face was partly turned, but the coat, the posture, the hand reaching into the pharmacy bag were clear. "Do you recognize both people?" Nora asked. "Yes, Mr. Briggs and Mrs. Whitmore." The second image showed Harold walking toward the private hallway with the pharmacy bag. "Yes," Annie said. "That's the hallway near Mr. Whitmore's room." The third image was darker. It showed a side door near the garage late at night. Harold stood with another man Annie did not recognize. The man wore a baseball cap and a dark jacket. Harold handed him something small. Annie leaned closer. Nora watched her. "Take your time." "I don't know him," Annie said. "But I saw him once before." Ethan turned from the window. "When?" Nora asked. "Maybe 2 weeks ago. I was taking trash out after dinner." He was by the garage with Mr. Briggs. I thought he was a delivery driver. What made you remember him? Annie frowned, trying to pull the picture back. His cap. It had a red bird on it, not a Braves cap, a cardinal maybe, and he had a pharmacy cooler bag. Nora typed. A pharmacy cooler bag? Yes, ma'am. Small, blue, with a white cross on the side. Harold's voice came from the doorway before anyone could answer. This is absurd. Everyone turned. He stood there with Caleb behind him, as if Caleb had caught him approaching and decided to let the room see it. Ethan's face hardened. You were told to remain in the library. I came to defend myself against this parade of nonsense, Caleb said. He left the library through the side passage. Nora closed the laptop halfway. That was a poor choice, Mr. Briggs. Harold ignored her. His eyes went straight to Annie. Now she remembers strangers in baseball caps. How convenient. Annie's hands tightened in her lap. But she did not look away. Harold stepped into the room. Do you see what's happening, sir? Every hour she invents something new. First the pills, then my words. Now mysterious men in the garage. She is feeding this because she likes being important. Ethan's voice was quiet. Stop, but Harold did not. Whatever restraint he had left broke under the pressure. No, sir, I will not stand here after 15 years of service and be ruined by a girl who has been in this house for 4 months. She is poor, frightened, and ambitious. That is a dangerous combination. She saw an opportunity and took it. Annie stood before she realized she had moved. I didn't take anything. Harold laughed. Not yet. Ethan moved from the window, slow but firm. One more insult, Harold. The old housekeeper turned to him. You are not yourself, sir. That is exactly the point. You are letting servants, lawyers, and old drivers turn you against your own blood. Ethan stopped in front of him. My blood is not the issue. My medication is. It was a pharmacy error. Then why are you afraid of the footage? Harold's mouth opened, then closed. Nora spoke. And why did you leave the library through a side passage? Harold looked at her with open contempt. I don't answer to you. No, Ethan said. You answer to me. For the first time, Harold seemed to understand that the old order of the house was no longer holding. His eyes moved to the desk, to the folders, to Annie, to Caleb by the door. He looked trapped, but not finished. I want a lawyer, he said. Nora nodded. That would be wise. Ethan looked at Caleb. Escort him back. 2 security officers outside the door this time. Harold turned to leave, then paused. His voice dropped, but everyone heard it. You think this ends with me? Ethan did not answer. Caleb took Harold by the arm. Harold jerked away but walked out. The room stayed still after he left. Annie felt her pulse in her throat. Dr. Reed exhaled. That was not the behavior of an innocent man. Nora opened her laptop again. No, and it may have helped us. She rewound the garage footage and zoomed in on the man with the cap. The image sharpened enough to show part of his face and the logo on the cooler bag. Nora's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. There are only a few private medical courier services in Atlanta using that bag design. Ethan looked at her. Find him. I'm already looking. Annie sat back down, but her mind remained on Harold's last words. You think this ends with me? No, she thought. It did not. And when Nora's phone buzzed 10 minutes later, the look on her face proved it. She read the message once, then again. The courier's name is Daniel Price, she said. He was formerly contracted with a private pharmacy in Savannah. Ethan's hand closed around the top of his cane. Nora looked up, and 3 months ago, he began receiving payments from Vail Advisory Group. Nora did not send the message to the printer. She copied it to a secure folder, then turned the laptop so Ethan could see the payment record himself. Daniel Price. Former medical courier. 3 payments from Vail Advisory Group. The first 2 were listed as consulting fees. The third had no description at all. Ethan read the screen without speaking. His face had gone still in a way Annie now understood was not calm. It was control. How much? He asked. Nora answered, 5,000 each for the first 2, 10,000 for the last. Dr. Reed's mouth tightened. That is expensive delivery work. Caleb stood near the office door, arms folded. It's not delivery work. No one disagreed. Annie looked at the name on the screen and tried to remember the man by the garage. Red bird cap, dark jacket, blue cooler bag. She had passed him for only a few seconds, carrying a trash bag that smelled of coffee grounds and lemon peels. He had turned his face away when she looked at him. At the time, she thought he was being polite. Now she wondered how many dangerous things looked ordinary because people were too tired to question them. Ethan turned to Nora. "Can we reach him? I have a number tied to his courier license. It may not be active." Nora glanced at Annie. "Miss Carter, before we call, I need to confirm something. When you saw him by the garage 2 weeks ago, was Mr. Briggs carrying anything?" Annie closed her eyes for a moment, pulling the memory together. "A black pouch, maybe leather, small enough to fit in one hand. I thought it was one of those travel cases for medicine. Did the courier hand something to Harold, or did Harold hand something to him? I think the courier gave him the blue bag. Harold gave him the black pouch. Harold exchanging something, not just receiving." Nora typed. "Good. That matters." Ethan looked at her. "Why? If Harold gave him something, this may not only be about bringing pills into the house. It may involve removing the correct medication, receipts, or packaging." Dr. Reed nodded. "If someone wanted to hide a substitution, they'd need to control both what came in and what disappeared." Annie felt cold despite the warm room. Ethan's office phone rang before Nora could call the courier. Everyone turned toward it. Ethan did not move. Nora checked the screen. "Margaret." Ethan stared at the name. "Of course. Do you want to answer?" "Yes." Nora pressed the speaker button. Margaret's voice came through smooth and low. "Ethan, I've just spoken with Preston. You frightened him." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Good. That is not funny. I wasn't joking." A soft breath came through the line. "This has gone too far. I understand you're upset about the medication. I understand that young woman startled you, but now you're calling my son as though he were a criminal." Nora looked at Ethan but said nothing. Ethan's voice stayed level. "Preston's consulting account paid a medical courier connected to the same pharmacy that filled medication I was never prescribed." Another pause. Margaret recovered quickly. "Preston's company pays many contractors. You know how these accounts work." "I know how evidence works." "Evidence?" Her laugh was quiet and sharp. "You have a frightened maid, an old driver, and a doctor who is trying to cover his own embarrassment for missing your decline." Dr. Reed's eyes hardened, but he remained silent. Ethan said, "Choose your next words carefully. I am choosing them as your sister. You are ill. You have been ill. Everyone has seen it. The board has seen it. You forget things, Ethan. You lose your place. You nearly fell at the charity breakfast. You are not thinking like yourself." Annie looked at Ethan. For the first time, she saw the wound those words caused, not because Margaret was right, but because she had picked every moment of weakness and laid it before him like proof he should no longer trust his own mind. Ethan's hand closed around the cane head. Margaret continued, softer now, almost tender. "Let me help you. Step back for a few months. Let Preston handle operations. We can settle this quietly. Harold can retire. The girl can be given a little money and sent on her way. No one needs to be hurt." Annie felt the room tilt. The girl, a little money, sent on her way. Ethan's eyes lifted to Annie's face. "No," he said. Margaret's voice cooled. "No? No to all of it. Ethan, don't be stubborn. Do not confuse my silence with weakness, Margaret. I have protected you. You have managed me. I am your family. Then act like it." The line went silent. When Margaret spoke again, there was no softness left. "If you drag this into the open, you will damage the company, the foundation, and Mother's name. Is that what you want? A public scandal because a maid wanted attention?" Ethan stood slowly. "Her name is Annie Carter. And if this goes public, it will not be because she told the truth. It will be because you tried to bury it." Margaret hung up. For several seconds no one spoke. The rain had stopped outside. The quiet afterward felt worse. Nora saved the call record. She offered to pay Miss Carter to leave. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, that helps establish motive to suppress a witness." Annie looked at Nora. "A witness?" Nora softened her tone a little. "That's what you are now. Annie wished the word did not feel so heavy. Caleb stepped closer to the desk. We need to move faster. Harold knows we found the courier. Margaret knows we found Preston. Ethan nodded. Call Daniel Price. Nora dialed from her own phone and put it on speaker. The call rang 6 times. Just when Annie thought it would go to voicemail, a man answered. Yeah? Mr. Price, this is Nora Ellis. I represent Ethan Whitmore. The line crackled. Don't know him. That's interesting, because we have footage of you at his estate and payment records from Vale Advisory Group. The man said nothing. Nora continued, calm and precise. We can speak voluntarily now, or law enforcement can speak to you later. One tends to be more comfortable. Look, I delivered packages. That's it. What packages? Medical stuff. For whom? I don't read labels. You were contracted with a private pharmacy in Savannah. I deliver for lots of places. You received $20,000 from Vale Advisory Group. That was for private courier work. Private courier work involving Harold Briggs? Another silence. Ethan leaned toward the phone. Mr. Price, this is Ethan Whitmore. The medication you delivered may have been used to harm me. If you know something and stay quiet, you will not remain a courier. You will become part of the crime. The man breathed hard into the phone. I didn't know anybody was getting hurt. Nora's eyes sharpened. What did you know? I knew Mrs. Whitmore wanted certain bottles swapped. Annie's hand flew to her mouth before she could stop it. Ethan did not move. Nora said, Which Mrs. Whitmore? Margaret. Look, I didn't meet her much. Mostly the old guy, Harold. Sometimes she was there. She said her brother was confused, and the doctor was changing things around, and Harold would handle the house side. I didn't ask questions. What did you deliver? Bottles. Same labels. Different contents sometimes. Other times I picked up old ones. Who provided the replacement pills? I don't know. Mr. Price, I'm telling you, I don't know names. I picked up sealed packets from the Savannah pharmacy. A woman there had them ready. Who paid you? The consulting company. Preston Vale's company? I guess. That's the name on the transfer. Ethan's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. Did my nephew know? Daniel Price hesitated. Nora spoke before Ethan could. You need to answer. I heard him once, Daniel said. On speaker. He was mad because things were taking too long. He said the board meeting was coming and Mr. Whitmore was still too functional. That was his word. Not mine. Too functional. The phrase moved through the room like smoke. Dr. Reed looked away, visibly sickened. Ethan closed his eyes. Annie thought of him standing in the hallway with his cane, trying to look strong while people around him counted his weakness like money. Nora said, Mr. Price, where are you now? No. I'm not telling you that. You just confessed to participating in medication tampering. I said I delivered packages. You said bottles were swapped. I didn't know what it meant. Then help us prove that. Daniel's voice dropped. If I talk, they'll ruin me. Ethan opened his eyes. They already used you. That landed. The courier went quiet. Finally, he said, I have messages. Pickup times. Payment confirmations. One voicemail from Harold. Nora sat straighter. Preserve everything. I can send copies. Send them now. Do not delete anything. I want something in writing that I cooperated. You'll get documentation that you contacted counsel voluntarily. That is not immunity. I understand. Nora gave him a secure email address. The call ended. The room stayed frozen for a moment after the line went dead. Then Ethan sat down heavily, as though the weight of his own family had finally reached his bones. Annie wanted to leave. She also wanted to say something, though she had no right to speak into a hurt that old and private. Ethan looked at her first. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Annie shook her head. I'm sorry they did that to you. The answer was too simple for the size of the moment, but it was true. Ethan's expression shifted, and for a brief second Annie saw not the billionaire, not the CEO, but a tired man who had trusted blood and been repaid with poison. Nora's laptop kimmed. She opened the incoming files from Daniel Price. Screenshots. Payment records. A voicemail attachment. She clicked the audio. Harold's voice filled the office. Bring the package after dark. Mrs. Whitmore wants the old bottles removed before the nurse notices. And make sure Preston's name stays off the paperwork this time. The recording ended. No one needed to interpret it. Caleb moved first. I'll get Harold. Ethan stood again. This time, he did not reach for the cane right away. No, he said. Let him think he still has room to move. Nora looked at him. What are you suggesting? Ethan picked up the medication log and closed it. Tonight Harold prepares my tray as usual. Dr. Reed frowned. Absolutely not. I won't take it. You'll prepare the real dose. But Harold doesn't know that. Caleb understood first. You want to catch him doing it. I want him on camera, with the bottle in his hand and no sister to hide behind. Annie felt fear rise again. Sir, what if he figures it out? Ethan looked toward the closed door. Then we learn how desperate he is. Nora considered it, then nodded slowly. We can do it safely. Hidden camera in the medicine room, security nearby. No actual risk to your health. Dr. Reed did not like it, but he did not refuse. I control every pill you take. Agreed, Ethan said. Annie looked from one face to another and understood the house was no longer waiting for truth to appear. It was setting a place for it. Ethan turned to Caleb. Keep Miss Carter away from Harold tonight. Annie straightened. I can go home. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. The message you received means someone wants you scared. Until we know who sent it. I'd rather have you where we can protect you. She thought of Miss Evelyn alone at the apartment. My grandmother. Caleb will arrange someone to check on her, with your permission. Annie hesitated, then nodded. Outside the office, the old house settled into evening. Lights clicked on in distant rooms. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes were stacked for a dinner no one had appetite for. Harold Briggs waited in the library, believing his silence was still useful. And in the small medicine room near Ethan Whitmore's suite, a camera no bigger than a coat button was being placed where it could see everything. By 7 o'clock, Whitmore Estate had grown too quiet. The dinner service had been canceled, though no one had announced it as such. Mrs. Alvarez had prepared roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, and biscuits because that was what the kitchen schedule said to prepare, but the food sat under warming covers while the house waited for something no one was allowed to name. Annie remained in the small sitting room near Ethan's office with a plate she had barely touched, her phone face up on the table in case Miss Evelyn called. Caleb had arranged for a retired police officer he trusted to drive by Annie's apartment and check that her grandmother was safe. Miss Evelyn had not liked the idea of being watched over by strangers, but she had liked it less when Annie offered to leave the estate and come home. You stay where they can see you, Evelyn had said over the phone. And don't let that old snake get you alone. Annie had almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. Now she sat with a biscuit broken in half on her plate, listening to the distant sounds of a trap being set. Down the hall, Nora and Caleb worked with 2 security men Annie had never seen before. Dr. Reed had prepared Ethan's real medication and locked it in his medical bag. The old medicine cabinet had been left looking untouched. The questionable bottles were still arranged where Harold expected them, though the dangerous pills had been removed and replaced with harmless tablets marked for identification. A hidden camera faced the cabinet. Another watched the hallway. Ethan had insisted on walking through the plan himself. He must believe nothing has changed, Nora said. He already knows too much has changed, Caleb answered. Then he must believe I'm tired enough to make a mistake, Ethan said. No one liked that part. Not Dr. Reed, not Nora, not Caleb. Annie liked it least of all, though she had no voice in the decision. She had seen Harold's eyes when he looked at her. He was not finished blaming her. And men like Harold did not accept blame quietly when they had spent years handing it down to others. At 7:30, Caleb came to the sitting room. You all right? He asked. No. He nodded as if that was the only sensible answer. Good. Means you're paying attention. Where is Mr. Briggs? In the library. Security outside. Does he know? That we know everything? No. That he's trapped? Maybe. Annie looked at the dark window. Her reflection looked young and tired. What happens if he doesn't do anything? Then we keep digging. And if he does, then the digging gets easier. Caleb's phone buzzed. He read the message and slipped it back into his pocket. Nora wants you in the back office. Not the sitting room. Why? Harold asked to use the restroom. Annie stood at once. Caleb saw her face. He won't get near you. The back office was small and windowless. used for household accounts. Nora was there with a laptop open to 4 camera feeds. Ethan stood behind her chair, one hand on his cane, Dr. Reed beside him. On the screen, Harold walked down the corridor with one security guard in front and one behind. His posture remained straight, but his face had the flat look of a man counting exits. "He's looking toward the medicine room," Nora said. Caleb shut the office door after Annie entered. "He knows the route." Ethan did not take his eyes off the screen. He designed half the household routines. On the monitor, Harold passed the restroom. The guard in front stopped and gestured toward the door. Harold stepped inside. The second guard waited outside. Nora switched camera angles. Restroom has no interior camera, obviously. Hallway only. They waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The guard outside the restroom shifted his weight. Caleb muttered, "Too long." At 1 minute and 20 seconds, the restroom door opened, but Harold did not come out. Instead, the small service panel beside the linen closet moved. Caleb cursed under his breath. Nora clicked to another camera. Harold emerged into a narrow service passage behind the private hall, moving faster now, no longer pretending. "How did he get through there?" Ethan asked. Caleb was already at the door. "Old laundry access. I forgot it connected." "Go," Ethan said. Caleb left with one of the security men. Annie's pulse beat in her throat. On the screen, Harold walked through the service passage and stopped near the medicine room. He looked back once. Then he took a key from his pocket. Nora leaned closer. That key should have been surrendered. Ethan's face went cold. Apparently not. Harold opened the medicine room door and slipped inside. The hidden camera showed him clearly now. The room was no bigger than a pantry, with locked cabinets, a small counter, and shelves labeled by category. Harold moved with practiced speed. He opened the cabinet, took out Ethan's evening bottle, and removed a small envelope from inside his jacket. Annie covered her mouth. Dr. Reed's voice was quiet. "There it is." Harold unscrewed the bottle, tipped pills into his palm, then reached into the envelope. Nora started recording a separate copy, timestamp preserved. Ethan's hand tightened around the cane until his knuckles paled. On screen, Harold paused. He looked toward the corner of the room. Annie's stomach dropped. He had seen something, not the camera itself, maybe, but a glint, a shadow, a wrongness in a room he knew too well. His face changed. "He knows," Annie whispered. Harold shoved the envelope back into his jacket, grabbed the bottle, and turned for the door. Ethan moved before anyone else. Dr. Reed reached for him. "Ethan." "Wait." But Ethan was already in the hallway. Annie followed without meaning to. Nora caught her arm. "Stay back. I can't just—" "You can, and you will. Caleb has him." But Caleb did not have him yet. Harold burst out of the medicine room just as Ethan reached the private hall. For a second, the two men faced each other across the carpeted corridor, the billionaire with his cane and the housekeeper with the stolen bottle in his hand. Ethan's voice was quiet. "Going somewhere?" Harold looked past him, measuring distance, doors, chances. "Sir, this is not what it looks like. It looks like you're holding my medication after being ordered not to touch it. I was checking it for your safety." "You ran through a service passage to check it?" Harold's face twitched. "You are being manipulated." "By whom?" Harold's eyes cut down the hall. Annie had stepped out despite Nora's warning and now stood several yards away. "By her," he said. Annie froze. Harold pointed at her, the same finger that had been in her face the day before. "This girl has poisoned your mind against loyal people. She has been feeding lies to everyone in this house, and you've been too weak to see it." Caleb appeared behind Harold at the end of the hall, silent and ready. Ethan did not look away from the housekeeper. "Put the bottle down." Harold's grip tightened. "I protected this house for 15 years. You protected yourself. I gave my life to this family. You sold it." Harold's face broke then, not into remorse, into fury. "You think your sister is the villain? You think I woke up one morning and decided to tamper with a rich man's pills? She came to me because you wouldn't listen. Everyone could see you fading. The board saw it. Your staff saw it. She said it would be temporary, just enough to make you rest, just enough to make you step aside before you destroyed the company." Ethan's face drained of color. Annie felt the words land on him one by one. Harold kept talking now, as if the truth had cracked open, and he could not stop it from spilling. And yes, she paid me. Not enough for the risk, I'll tell you that. Not enough to stand here and be judged by a man who never noticed who kept his house standing. Ethan's voice was almost a whisper. You changed my medication. Harold's breathing grew uneven. I followed instructions. From Margaret. Harold swallowed. Say it, Ethan said. Harold looked at Annie again, hatred twisting his face. This is her fault. Caleb moved closer. Bottle on the table, Harold. There is no table. Then the floor. Harold looked toward the stairs, then lunged. Not at Ethan. At Annie. He moved faster than she expected from a man his age. Annie stumbled back. Nora grabbed her arm and pulled, but Harold's hand caught the sleeve of Annie's uniform. The bottle fell and rolled across the floor. Caleb reached him a second later, wrapping one arm around Harold's chest and wrenching him backward. Harold shouted, You ruined everything. Annie heard fabric tear. She saw Ethan step forward, cane striking the floor with a crack that echoed through the hall. Get your hands off her. Caleb forced Harold against the wall. One of the security men secured his wrists. Harold fought for another second, then stopped, breathing hard, his hair loose, his face red. Nora picked up the fallen bottle with a tissue and placed it in an evidence bag from her pocket. All on camera, she said. Harold laughed once, ugly and breathless. Camera won't save you from your own blood, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan stood in front of him. No, but it may save me from trusting it again. The words silenced Harold. Annie stood with her back against the wall, one hand holding her torn sleeve. She was not hurt, but her body had not realized that yet. Her knees shook. Her heart slammed. Caleb looked back at her. You okay? She nodded, though she was not sure. Ethan turned toward her. For a moment, all the anger in him changed shape. Miss Carter, he said, I'm sorry. Annie shook her head. He didn't hurt me. That is not the measure of what happened. Nora spoke into her phone now. Voice controlled. This is Nora Ellis at Whitmore Estate. We need law enforcement response for assault, evidence tampering, and suspected medication tampering. The suspect is detained by security. Harold's head snapped toward her. You can't call the police. Nora looked at him. I already did. Ethan bent slowly and picked up the small envelope Harold had dropped. Dr. Reed took it from him before he could open it barehanded. Inside were several white tablets. Dr. Reed looked at Harold. You were going to replace them again. Harold's silence answered. Caleb handed the security guard a set of keys taken from Harold's pocket. Medicine room key. Service passage key. And this. He held up a small black flash drive. Nora's eyes sharpened. Where was that? Inside his jacket. Harold looked away. Ethan stared at the drive. What's on it? Harold said nothing. Nora took it carefully. We'll find out. Police sirens were faint at first, then closer, winding through the wet streets outside the estate gates. Annie looked toward the sound, and a strange feeling moved through her. Not relief, not yet. But something like the first breath, after being underwater. Harold Briggs, the man who had pointed in her face, called her filthy, threatened her job, and tried to make her doubt her own eyes, was being held in the hallway he once ruled. Ethan looked at the cane in his hand, then at the medicine room door, then at Annie. You were right, he said. Annie's throat tightened. Before she could answer, Nora returned from the side office with her laptop and the flash drive in a sealed sleeve. Mr. Whitmore, she said. When the police finish with him, we still have Margaret and Preston. Ethan's face hardened again. From outside came the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. Yes, he said, and now we have Harold's confession to help us. The police entered Whitmore Estate through the front door, but no one in the house mistook it for an ordinary visit. 2 officers came first, followed by a detective in a dark raincoat, who introduced herself as Detective Laura Bennett. She was in her 50s, with short brown hair, tired eyes, and the kind of calm that made people choose their words more carefully. Harold Briggs stood in the hallway with his wrists secured in front of him, no longer wearing the authority he had carried for 15 years. Without it, he looked smaller, older, and far more dangerous in a different way. His uniform was still neat except for the sleeve Caleb had twisted while stopping him from reaching Annie. His face had settled into a mask of insulted dignity. Detective Bennett looked from Harold to Ethan, then to Annie's torn sleeve. "Who's injured?" "No one seriously," Caleb said. He grabbed Miss Carter. I pulled him off. The detective looked at Annie. "You're Miss Carter?" "Yes, ma'am." "You need medical attention?" Annie shook her head. "No, ma'am." "He scared me, that's all." Detective Bennett held her gaze for a second longer, as if she had heard that answer many times from people who were hurt in ways that did not leave marks. "Scared counts. We'll take your statement." Harold gave a bitter laugh. "Of course. Everyone wants her statement." Ethan turned his head. "Be quiet." The detective glanced at Ethan, then back at Harold. "That advice is probably in your best interest." Nora stepped forward with her tablet and the evidence bags. "Detective, I'm Nora Ellis, counsel for Mr. Whitmore. We have security footage of Mr. Briggs entering the medicine room after being instructed not to, handling Mr. Whitmore's medication, and physically moving toward Miss Carter. We also have a recorded statement from a courier and a voicemail involving medication bottles being removed." Detective Bennett took that in without surprise. "Medication tampering?" "Yes," Dr. Reed said. "I'm Dr. Samuel Reed, Mr. Whitmore's physician. The medication in his bottle did not match what I prescribed. I've secured samples for testing." The detective's expression sharpened. "Mr. Whitmore, were you given this medication?" Ethan looked at Harold before answering. "I believe I've been taking it for weeks." Harold snapped. "No one forced anything down your throat." The hallway went still. Even one of the officers shifted at that. Detective Bennett turned slowly toward Harold. "You understand how bad that sounded, right?" Harold closed his mouth. Ethan's face had gone pale again, but his voice stayed even. "I want him removed from my property." "We will," the detective said. "But first, we need to secure the scene." Nora led one officer to the medicine room. Dr. Reed handed over the sealed sample records. Caleb showed another officer the service passage Harold had used. Annie remained near the wall, both hands clasped around her phone. She wanted to call Miss Evelyn, but she did not want her grandmother to hear the fear in her voice. Ethan noticed. "Call her," he said. Annie looked up. "Sir? Your grandmother. She should hear from you before worry fills in the blanks." Annie nodded and stepped into the sitting room. Miss Evelyn answered quickly. "Annie? I'm okay. That means something happened." Annie closed her eyes. "Harold tried to grab me." Caleb stopped him. "The police are here." A chair scraped on the other end. "He put his hands on you?" "Just my sleeve." "I'm not hurt. Don't soften it for me." "I'm scared, but I'm not hurt." Miss Evelyn breathed out slowly. "Where are you now?" "At the estate. Detective is taking statements." "You tell them everything." "Not almost everything. Everything." "Yes, ma'am. And you come home tonight." "I don't know when." "Then I'll wait up." Annie's throat tightened. "You always do. That's because I'm old, not dead." Annie let out a shaky laugh. It helped more than she expected. When she returned to the hallway, Harold was being walked toward the front entrance. His eyes found her one last time. There was still hatred there, but something else had joined it now. Fear, not of her, not exactly, but of what her voice had started. As he passed Ethan, Harold stopped. "You think they'll protect you?" he said. "Margaret knows every weak spot in your life. Your board, your doctors, your dead wife's foundation. She'll burn it all before she lets that boy lose his place." Ethan looked at him. "You should worry about your own confession." Harold smiled without warmth. "I confess to being paid. I didn't confess to being the only one." Detective Bennett touched his arm. "Move." They took him out. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since Annie had entered that house, Whitmore Estate felt less like a mansion and more like a crime scene. Nora came back from the medicine room with the flash drive sealed in a clear sleeve. "Detective Bennett wants a copy of the footage and the courier recording. I'll provide duplicates, not originals." Ethan nodded. "What about the flash drive?" "I haven't opened it yet. I'd rather do it with Detective Bennett present." The detective returned a few minutes later, took Harold's keys from Caleb, then joined them in Ethan's office. No one sat except Ethan, and only because Dr. Reed told him twice. Annie stood near the door, unsure whether she was allowed to leave. Nora noticed. "Miss Carter, you're part of this now. Stay unless you want to step out." Annie stayed. Nora inserted the flash drive into a clean laptop not connected to the estate network. "If this contains malware, I don't want it touching anything important." Caleb stood behind her. "Harold isn't that clever." Nora glanced at him. "Margaret might be." That ended the comment. A folder appeared on the screen. Inside were scanned documents, several photos, and audio files labeled only by dates. Nora opened the most recent document first. It was a schedule, not a household schedule, a schedule of Ethan's symptoms: morning confusion, afternoon drowsiness, board call performance, memory lapses, fall risk, medication response. Annie felt sick as she read the words. Someone had tracked his decline like a business report. Ethan leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. Nora scrolled to the bottom. Initials appeared beside some entries. Hut B, Minev, and on several pages, P.V. Detective Bennett asked, "Those initials belong to?" Nora answered, "Harold Briggs, Margaret Whitmore, Preston Vale." Ethan said nothing. Dr. Reed muttered, "Good God." Nora opened a photo next. Ethan in a conference room, head bowed, eyes closed. Another showed him gripping a podium at a charity breakfast. Another showed him sitting in the back seat of a car, asleep with his mouth slightly open. The pictures were not family concern. They were surveillance. Ethan's hand moved to the cane beside his chair, then stopped before touching it. Annie looked away. She felt ashamed for seeing him like that. Even though she had done nothing wrong, Margaret had not only weakened him, she had collected his weakness. Nora opened an audio file. Harold's voice came first. "He's still asking questions about the evening pills." Then Margaret's voice, clear and sharp. "Then make sure he stops having the energy to ask them." Ethan shut his eyes. Preston's voice followed, impatient. "The board session is in 8 days. If he shows up sharp, this whole thing falls apart." Margaret said, "He won't." The audio ended. No one moved. Detective Bennett spoke first. "I'll need that file copied immediately." Nora nodded. "Of course." Ethan rose from his chair. Dr. Reed started to protest, but Ethan held up one hand. "My sister did this." It was not a question. Nora's voice softened. "The evidence points that way." "And Preston?" "Yes." Ethan walked to the window. Outside, police lights flashed red and blue across the wet drive. "My mother used to say family was who stayed when the room got ugly." Caleb's voice came from the back of the office. "Sometimes family is who made the room ugly." Ethan gave a tired, humorless breath. "She would have liked you, Caleb." "She did, sir." That quiet answer changed the room. Annie did not know Ethan's mother had known Caleb. She wondered how long loyalty could live in a house without announcing itself, while betrayal wore pearls and signed checks. Detective Bennett closed her notebook. "Mr. Whitmore, we'll be seeking warrants for related accounts, communications, and devices. Given the names involved, this may move carefully, but it will move." Ethan turned from the window. "Move fast. I'll do what the law allows." "What the law allows may be slower than what justice requires." The detective nodded once. "Often is." Nora looked at her phone. "We also have a corporate issue. Margaret scheduled an executive session for next week. If she senses Harold is cooperating, she may accelerate." "She will," Ethan said. "Then we need to prepare for the board." Dr. Reed frowned. "Ethan, your health, my health is exactly why I'll be there." Nora nodded slowly. "We'll need a clean timeline, medical findings, payment records, the courier statement, footage, and the flash drive contents. Annie's testimony may matter too." Annie's head lifted. "Mine?" Margaret's words came back to her. "The girl can be given a little money and sent on her way." Nora looked at her directly. "You found the first wrong pill. You reported it. You were threatened. You saw the courier before. You received a threatening message. Yes, your testimony matters." Annie felt the room tilt again, but this time she did not step back. Ethan looked at her. "I won't force you," Detective Bennett added. "No one should." Annie thought of her grandmother's hands sorting pills under kitchen light. She thought of Harold's finger in her face. She thought of Ethan's photos on the flash drive, a man's decline recorded by people waiting to benefit from it. "I'll tell the truth," she said. Ethan's expression changed, and for the first time that night, his eyes held something close to gratitude that did not need words. Nora closed the laptop. "Then we prepare." Detective Bennett left with the officers near midnight. Harold was gone. Evidence had been copied. Statements had begun. The house was secure, but no one pretended it was safe. Caleb drove Annie home again. This time, Ethan walked her to the door before she left. Dr. Reed hovered nearby, annoyed that his patient was still standing. At the entrance, Ethan said, "Miss Carter, what happened tonight was my responsibility." "No, sir. Harold made his choices." "In my house." Annie did not know how to answer. He continued, "You should never have been treated as disposable here." That word stayed with her. Disposable. It was exactly how Harold had treated her. Cheap labor. Young. Poor. Replaceable. Someone whose fear could be counted on. Annie looked at Ethan. "My grandmother says people show you who they are by how they treat someone they don't need." Ethan absorbed that. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is. Then tell her I owe her thanks too." Annie almost smiled. "She'll probably say you owe her better security." For the first time since the police came, Ethan laughed softly. It was brief, but real. She'd be right. Caleb opened the car door for Annie. Before she got in, she looked back at the house. The windows glowed against the night. But now she knew light did not mean innocence. Sometimes it only meant the truth had farther to travel before it reached the dark corners. As the car pulled away, Ethan remained under the portico with his cane in one hand and the weight of his own blood on his shoulders. Annie watched him grow smaller through the rear window. The next battle would not happen in a hallway or a medicine room. It would happen in a boardroom, where people smiled before they destroyed each other. By Monday morning, the story inside Whitmore Estate had begun to leak into places no one could mop clean. Not the public story. Not yet. No newspaper had printed Ethan's name beside the word investigation. No business channel had mentioned medication, police, or family betrayal. But inside Whitmore Holdings, people sensed movement. Executive assistants whispered near elevators. Board members returned calls faster than usual. Legal staff worked through the weekend without complaining because the names on the documents were too large to ignore. Annie did not know most of that. She knew only that Caleb picked her up before class, and that a different car sat outside her apartment building after midnight, watching the street until dawn. She knew Miss Evelyn pretended not to be scared by making too much breakfast. "You can't go into a boardroom on an empty stomach," Evelyn said, sliding scrambled eggs onto Annie's plate. "I'm not going into the boardroom today. Just to Mr. Whitmore's office later." Same kind of room, same kind of people. Annie looked at her grandmother. "You ever been in one?" "No, but I've cleaned enough rooms after powerful people left to know they don't get smarter just because the table is long." Annie smiled despite herself, then looked down at her notebook. Nora had asked her to write a second statement, clearer and shorter, for the corporate attorneys. Facts only, no guessing, no emotion. Annie understood why, but it felt strange. The truth had lived in her body as fear, insult, shaking hands, Harold's finger near her face. On paper, it became times, locations, names, statements. Miss Evelyn saw her staring. "Truth don't lose power because it's written plain." "I'm scared they'll make me sound stupid." "They'll try." Annie looked up. "That's not comfort, Grandma. It's preparation." Evelyn reached across the table and tapped Annie's hand. "When someone tries to make you feel small, don't rush to prove you're big. Just stay exact." So Annie went to class, stayed exact, and copied notes on cardiac medications while her phone rested face up beside her notebook. No new threats came. Somehow that made her more uneasy. After class, Caleb drove her to Whitmore Holdings instead of the estate. The building stood downtown, all glass and steel, reflecting the cloudy Atlanta sky. Annie stepped out of the SUV and looked up until her neck hurt. She had passed buildings like this on buses all her life. She had never imagined walking through the front doors with someone waiting for her name at security. Caleb noticed her hesitation. "You ready?" "No." "Good. Means you won't get careless. She almost laughed. You say that a lot. It keeps being true. Inside, the lobby smelled like coffee, polished stone, and money. People in suits crossed the floor with phones in their hands and badges clipped to jackets. A security guard checked Caleb in, then looked at Annie's ID. "Miss Carter," he said, "Miss Ellis is expecting you." Annie heard Miss Carter again and wondered how many times a person had to be called by her name before it stopped feeling surprising. Nora met them near the elevators. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a folder thick enough to make Annie's stomach tighten. "Annie," she said, "thank you for coming." "Yes, ma'am. We're going upstairs to a preparation room. Mr. Whitmore is already there. Dr. Reed, too. You are not being put on trial. But Margaret's attorneys will try to make it feel that way if this reaches formal proceedings. Today we prepare so they can't rattle you." Annie nodded. "Facts only." Nora's expression softened. "Facts first. But don't let anyone convince you your dignity is irrelevant." The elevator climbed fast enough to make Annie's ears pop. Caleb stood beside her, silent. Nora reviewed the plan. Board executive session had been moved up to Wednesday. Margaret requested it under the existing health contingency agenda. Ethan's team believed she did not know the full contents of Harold's flash drive yet, only that Harold had been detained and that Daniel Price might be cooperating. That made her dangerous. A person caught halfway sometimes tried to burn the rest of the bridge. In the preparation room, Ethan stood near a window overlooking the city. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and looked more alert than Annie had seen him. The cane remained near his hand, but he was not leaning on it as heavily. Dr. Reed sat at the table with medical records arranged in neat stacks. A corporate attorney Annie had not met introduced himself as Martin Hale. He was older, black, with a calm voice and silver-rimmed glasses. Annie felt some part of her loosen when he shook her hand and did not rush. "Miss Carter," he said, "I've heard a great deal about your eye for detail." Annie did not know what to do with that. "I just noticed the pill. Most truth begins with a just." Ethan turned from the window. "How are you?" Annie answered honestly before she could stop herself. "Nervous." "So Annie." That surprised her. He saw it and gave a faint smile. "Money doesn't make betrayal easier. It just gives it better furniture." No one laughed loudly, but the room breathed for the first time. Nora laid out the timeline on the table. Pharmacy delivery. Margaret on camera. Harold handling the bottles. Symptoms documented on the flash drive. Daniel Price's payments. Preston's call. Executive session scheduled. Annie's discovery. Harold's threat. Dr. Reed's confirmation. Harold caught in the medicine room. Martin Hale listened, then looked at Annie. "When they question you, they may not begin with the pill. They may begin with you." "With me?" "Your age, your education, your money, your job, whether you were hoping for a reward, whether you dislike Harold, whether you touched the bottle. Their goal will be to make the board doubt your motive before they look at what you found." Annie's hands tightened in her lap. "I don't have a motive." "Everyone has motives," Martin said gently. "Yours was concern. Let them have that. Don't pretend you weren't scared. Don't pretend you didn't need the job. Needing money doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you employed." Ethan looked down at the table. Annie wondered if he was thinking about Harold calling her desperate. Nora opened the folder and pulled out printed stills from security footage. "There's one more thing you should know." Ethan's face changed. He had already seen it. Nora placed a photo on the table. It showed the boardroom calendar from 2 weeks earlier. A note in Margaret's handwriting had been enlarged beside it. "If E declines further, move P forward before Q4 vote." Annie read it twice. Ethan, P. Preston." Dr. Reed spoke quietly. "They were waiting for him to get worse." "No," Ethan said. His voice was low. "They were making sure I did." The room went silent. A knock came at the door. Caleb opened it, listened to someone outside, then turned back. "Mrs. Whitmore is downstairs." Nora checked her watch. "She wasn't scheduled. She says she's here to see her brother." Ethan's mouth tightened. "Of course she is." Martin closed the folder. "Do you want her sent away?" Ethan stood straighter. "No. Put her in the conference room across the hall. Nora, Martin, stay with me. Caleb, stay with Annie." Annie rose halfway. Should I leave? Ethan looked at her. No, but you do not have to see her. Before Annie could answer, Margaret's voice drifted in from the hallway, calm and carrying. I don't need a conference room. I need 5 minutes with my brother. Caleb stepped fully into the doorway, blocking the entrance. Mrs. Whitmore, you'll wait where you're asked. There was a pause. Then Margaret appeared beyond him, dressed in navy this time. Pearls at her throat. Preston beside her in a gray suit. Preston looked younger in person than he sounded on the phone, but not kinder. His eyes went straight to Annie and stayed there just long enough to make the message clear. Margaret looked past Caleb. Ethan, this is humiliating. Ethan stepped into view. That seems to trouble you more than what was done to me. Her face tightened. You are still my brother, and you are still avoiding the question. Preston spoke. Uncle Ethan, this has become a legal ambush. Mom came to help. Ethan's gaze shifted to him. Did you pay Daniel Price? Preston's mouth opened, then closed. Margaret touched his arm. Do not answer that in a hallway. Martin Hale moved beside Ethan. Good advice. He should answer it, with counsel present. Preston flushed. Who are you? The attorney who is going to make sure no one calls this family concern when the records call it conspiracy. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Careful. Martin smiled faintly. Always. Margaret looked at Annie then. The room seemed to narrow around that gaze. So this is what we've become, Margaret said. My brother surrounded by lawyers and servants, all because a girl wanted to feel important. Annie felt Caleb shift beside her, but she answered before anyone else could. I wanted him to stop taking the wrong pills. Margaret's eyes cooled. You have no idea what you've stepped into. No, ma'am, Annie said, but I know what I saw. Preston laughed under his breath. You know what you were told to see. Ethan's voice cut in. Enough. But Annie did not look away from Preston. Not this time. Nobody told me to look at the pill, she said. Nobody told me to read the paper. Nobody told me to ask for it to be tested. That was me. For the first time, Preston looked uncertain. It lasted only a second, but Annie saw it. Margaret saw Annie say it. Ethan, Margaret said, turning away from Annie as if she had dismissed her. If you push this forward, you will not control what happens next. The board will hear about your confusion. They will hear about the falls. They will hear about the missed calls, the forgotten names, the days you could barely stay awake. They will not care why. They will care that it happened. Ethan's face paled, but he did not sit down. Nora said, and then they will hear why it happened. Margaret smiled. If you can prove it. Nora lifted the folder. We can. That was the first moment Margaret's confidence cracked. Not enough for strangers to notice. Enough for Annie. Preston leaned toward his mother. We should go. Margaret did not move at first. Then she put her gloves back on. This family used to understand discretion, she said. Ethan answered. This family used discretion to hide rot. Her eyes flashed. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Preston followed, but not before looking back at Annie. You're going to regret this, he said. Caleb took one step forward. Say that again. Preston kept walking. When the elevator doors closed, Annie realized her hands were shaking. Ethan saw. Miss Carter, I'm okay, she said, though she was not. Martin Hale looked toward the closed elevator. That was useful. Annie stared at him. Useful? They're rattled. Rattled people rush. Nora nodded. And they just confirmed what they're afraid of. Ethan returned to the table. Then we don't wait for Wednesday. Nora looked at him. You want to call an emergency session? Yes, tomorrow morning. Dr. Reed frowned. Ethan, I will not give them 2 days to bury records, pressure witnesses, or poison the board before we arrive. No one said anything for a moment. Then Martin adjusted his glasses. Tomorrow morning, then. Annie sat back down slowly. Her whole body felt tired, but beneath the fear something steadier had begun to form. Margaret had tried to make her small. Preston had tried to make her afraid. Harold had tried to make her silent. But the truth was no longer standing in a hallway with one frightened girl holding a pill bottle. It had a doctor, a lawyer, a driver, a timeline, a recording, a flash drive, and a man finally willing to face his own blood. Ethan looked at Annie from across the table. You don't have to speak tomorrow unless it becomes necessary, he said. Annie thought of Miss Evelyn's breakfast table, The pill organizer, the cracked phone, the text message, the way Margaret had said girl like it meant disposable. If it becomes necessary, Annie said, I will. The emergency board session began at 9 the next morning. But Annie had been awake since 4:17. She knew the time because she had stared at the red numbers on the stove clock, while Miss Evelyn made coffee strong enough to wake the neighbors. Neither of them said much. There were mornings when words helped, and mornings when they only made fear louder. Miss Evelyn set a plate in front of her. Toast, eggs, 2 strips of bacon saved from Sunday, and half an orange. Eat. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask what you were. Annie picked up the toast. Miss Evelyn sat across from her, robe tied tight, pill organizer beside her elbow. You remember what I told you? Stay exact. And don't let them make me apologize for having eyes. And? Annie looked up. Miss Evelyn's face softened. Come home, the same girl you left. Don't let their money change the size of your soul. That was the sentence Annie carried with her when Caleb arrived. She carried it through the wet parking lot, through the glass doors of Whitmore Holdings, through security, and into the elevator where her reflection looked too young for the day waiting above her. Ethan was already in the preparation room when she arrived. He wore a charcoal suit and a dark blue tie. His cane stood beside his chair, but his hand did not rest on it. Dr. Reed had insisted on checking him before the meeting, and Ethan had allowed it with the patience of a man who knew refusing care would only prove his enemy's point. Nora reviewed the order one final time. Mr. Whitmore opens. Dr. Reed confirms medical findings. I present timeline and documentary evidence. Martin addresses corporate governance and legal exposure. Annie only speaks if Margaret challenges the origin of the discovery or attacks her credibility directly. She will, Martin Hale said. Ethan looked at Annie. You still don't have to. Annie's mouth was dry. I know. That was all she could promise. At 8:57, they walked down the hall together. Caleb stayed half a step behind Annie, close enough that she felt less alone, but not so close that she felt guarded like a child. The boardroom doors opened. Annie had seen conference rooms in movies, but being inside one was different. The table was long and dark, polished until the ceiling lights reflected in it. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked over Atlanta. Coffee cups sat beside leather folders. Men and women in expensive suits turned as Ethan entered. Some looked concerned. Some looked curious. A few looked relieved, as if he had arrived weaker than expected, and their decision would be easier. Margaret sat near the far end of the table, wearing a white blazer. Preston sat beside her, clean-shaven, composed, a silver pen in his hand. When he saw Annie, his expression hardened for 1 second before he smoothed it away. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. Margaret spoke first. Ethan, before we begin, I want to say I'm glad you came. No one here wants to take anything from you. This is about continuity. Ethan placed both hands on the table. Then let's begin with the truth. One board member, a gray-haired man named Collins, shifted in his chair. We understood this meeting concerned temporary leadership planning due to your health. It does, Ethan said, but not in the way my sister presented it. Margaret sighed. Ethan. He turned to her. Not yet. The quiet that followed was the first crack in Margaret's control. Ethan looked around the table. For several months, many of you have noticed changes in me. Drowsiness, confusion, missed details, slower speech. I noticed them too. I believed I was aging badly, or that stress had finally caught up with me. I was wrong. Dr. Reed stood and distributed a brief medical summary. He did not dramatize anything. He explained the prescribed medication, the incorrect pills found in Ethan's bottle, and the likely effects of repeated unsupervised use. Impaired alertness, memory issues, fall risk, diminished executive function. A woman near the middle of the table frowned. Are you saying Mr. Whitmore was drugged? Dr. Reed paused. I'm saying he was given medication that was not prescribed to him, and that medication could produce the symptoms used to question his capacity. Margaret sat very still. Nora rose next. She connected her laptop to the boardroom screen. The issue is not only medical, it is evidentiary. The first image appeared, Harold receiving the pharmacy delivery. Then Margaret entering the frame. Then her hand inside the bag. Margaret leaned back. I already explained that. Nora clicked to the next slide. Medication access logs. Late-night entries under Harold's code. The executive session request. Payments from Vale Advisory Group to Daniel Price. Preston spoke. Those records are being misrepresented. Martin Hale looked at him. You'll have time to explain them under oath. Preston's face tightened. Nora played the courier call next. Daniel Price's voice filled the room, nervous and thin, saying Margaret wanted bottles swapped, saying Preston complained Ethan was still too functional. Too functional. The phrase did what no chart could do. It made people look away. Margaret stood. This is outrageous. A frightened courier trying to save himself. A disgruntled housekeeper. And now a young maid placed in the center of a corporate fight she cannot possibly understand. There it was. Annie felt every eye shift toward her. Margaret turned to the board. Not Annie. Ask yourselves why this girl was in Ethan's private room. Ask yourselves why she was handling medicine. Ask yourselves whether a struggling employee might see opportunity in a wealthy man's sympathy. Caleb moved slightly behind Annie. She did not look at him. She looked at Ethan. His face had gone hard, but before he could speak, Annie stood. The room changed again. She did not stand quickly. She pushed her chair back with care, laid her hands flat against her skirt, and remembered Miss Evelyn's kitchen. Stay exact. My name is Annie Carter, she said. Her voice shook on the first word, then steadied. I'm 18. I work part-time at Mr. Whitmore's house, and I go to community college for nursing. I was in his room because Mr. Briggs assigned me to clean it. Margaret watched her like a hawk. Annie continued. I didn't open a locked cabinet. I didn't search through private drawers. The medicine tray was on the bathroom counter. I saw the bottle. I saw the pills. They didn't look right. Collins asked, how would you know? My grandmother takes several medications. I sort them every week. Heart medicine, blood pressure medicine, diabetes medicine. A pharmacy made a mistake once. Since then, I check markings because one wrong pill can hurt someone. The woman who had spoken earlier leaned forward. What did you do after you noticed? I checked the instruction paper in the drawer. The pill didn't match. Then I took the bottle to Mr. Briggs and said someone should check it. And his response? Annie's fingers pressed into her palm. He told me to shut up. He said a girl like me didn't get to question what happened in Mr. Whitmore's bedroom. Margaret cut in. That is her version. Annie turned to her. No, ma'am. That is what happened. The room went still. Margaret's jaw tightened. You expect this board to accept your word over people who have served this family for decades? No, Annie said. I expect them to look at the pill. A silence followed, sharp and clean. Annie went on. I'm not here because I want money. I'm not here because I understand corporate leadership. I don't. I'm here because Mr. Whitmore was taking the wrong medication, and people tried to make that sound like my fault. Preston laughed under his breath. Very rehearsed. Annie looked at him. You called me that maid on the phone. Your mother called me the girl. Mr. Briggs called me worse. Maybe all of you thought if you made me small enough, nobody would listen. But the pill was still wrong. No one interrupted this time. Martin Hale folded his hands, watching the board more than Annie. Several faces had changed. Not softened exactly. Opened. Margaret stood straighter. This is emotional manipulation. Ethan finally spoke. No, Margaret. Emotional manipulation was photographing me at my weakest, so you could show the board a man you helped damage. Nora clicked again. The flash drive images appeared. Ethan asleep in a car. Ethan gripping a podium. Symptom notes with initials HB, MW, P, V. A low murmur moved around the table. Margaret's face lost color. Preston pushed back from the table. That's not what it looks like, he said. Ethan looked at him. It never is at first. Nora played the audio file. Harold's voice. He's still asking questions about the evening pills. Margaret's voice. Then make sure he stops having the energy to ask them. Preston's voice. The board session is in 8 days. If he shows up sharp, this whole thing falls apart. When it ended, the boardroom was silent. No one looked at Annie now. All eyes were on Margaret and Preston. Collins removed his glasses. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have an explanation? Margaret opened her mouth, but nothing came. Preston stood. I want counsel. Martin nodded. A wise decision. Ethan rose slowly. Effective immediately. I am requesting the board suspend Margaret Whitmore and Preston Vale from all advisory, executive, and governance access pending investigation. Nora Ellis and Martin Hale will provide full documentation to law enforcement and regulators as required. The woman at the center of the table spoke first. I second the motion. One by one, the others agreed. Margaret looked at Ethan with something almost like hatred. You would destroy your own family because of her? Ethan's voice did not rise. No. You tried to destroy me because of yours. Security entered quietly. Not dramatic, not violent, just final. Preston avoided Annie's eyes as he left. Margaret did not. She looked at Annie as if memorizing the face of the person she blamed for the collapse of what she had built. Annie held her gaze. For once, she did not lower her eyes. When the doors closed behind them, Ethan remained standing at the head of the table. His hand trembled once before he steadied it against the wood. The board said things after that. Procedures, interim controls, medical leave options, public statements, legal notifications. Annie heard only pieces. Her part was over, but her body had not understood yet. Caleb touched her shoulder lightly. You did it, Annie whispered. I just told the truth. He nodded. That's what I said. Ethan turned from the table and looked at her across the room. There were many people between them now, people with titles and authority. But for a moment, none of that mattered. He gave a small nod, not the nod of a billionaire to an employee, the nod of one human being to another, after both had survived the same lie. Annie sat down slowly, her knees weak, her heart still racing. Outside the windows, Atlanta moved on, as if nothing had happened. Cars crossed bridges. Office lights blinked on. People hurried toward meetings, lunches, bills, bus stops, ordinary lives. Inside the boardroom, the truth had finally reached the table where power sat. And this time, it had not been sent away. The boardroom did not empty all at once. Power rarely left a room quickly. It gathered its papers, asked careful questions, and made sure someone else was writing down the parts that might matter later. Annie stayed seated while voices moved around her. We'll need a public statement. Not until council approves language. What about the foundation? Separate controls immediately. Who contacts law enforcement? Already in motion. The words passed over her like weather. She understood some of them, missed others, and held on to the one thing she knew for certain. Margaret and Preston had walked out of that room no longer protected by the story they had built. Ethan remained at the head of the table until Dr. Reed leaned close and said something Annie could not hear. Ethan gave him a look, but after a moment, he nodded and sat down. His hand trembled when he reached for the glass of water. He noticed Annie noticing and gave a tired half-smile, as if to say the truth did not fix a body in a single morning. Nora came to Annie's chair. You did well. Annie looked up. Is it over? Nora's face softened. The meeting is over. The consequences are just starting. That answer was honest enough to make Annie trust it. Martin Hale joined them, removing his glasses and slipping them into his jacket pocket. Miss Carter, you should expect more questions later. From law enforcement, possibly from outside counsel. You don't need to answer anything alone. If anyone contacts you directly, you call Nora or Caleb. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. And one more thing, Martin said. She braced herself. Do not read the comments if this becomes public. Annie blinked. Comments, news sites, social media. People who don't know you will decide they know everything about you by lunchtime. Let them talk to themselves. Caleb, standing behind her, gave a quiet grunt of agreement. Best legal advice in the building. For the first time that day, Annie almost laughed. Ethan rose again, slower this time. Miss Carter, may I speak with you before Caleb takes you home? Yes, sir. Dr. Reed frowned. 5 minutes. Ethan looked at him. You timed my medication for years. Don't start timing my gratitude. Gratitude can be expressed sitting down. Then I'll sit. They moved to a smaller conference room down the hall. Caleb waited outside the door. Nora stayed, but at a distance, near the window, giving them privacy without leaving Annie alone in a corporate tower she did not know. Ethan sat at the table, folded his hands, and looked at Annie for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you more than thanks." Annie stiffened. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't do it for anything." "I know. I don't want anybody thinking I was after money." "I know that too." She looked down at her hands. "Mrs. Whitmore already said it. Margaret says whatever helps her sleep at night." Annie let out a breath. "People believe women like her." "Some do," Ethan said. "Some believe uniforms. Some believe money. Some believe age. Some believe a calm voice even when it is lying. I've made that mistake myself." Annie heard the weight in the last sentence and did not answer. Ethan opened the leather folder in front of him and slid one page across the table. "This is not payment for your testimony. It is not hush money. It is not charity meant to make me feel generous. Nora drafted it before the meeting, and Martin reviewed it. You are free to say no." Annie looked at the page but did not touch it. "What is it?" "A scholarship agreement. Full tuition for your nursing program, books, licensing fees, transportation support, and a living stipend so you don't have to work yourself sick while trying to become the person you are already becoming." The words were too large. Annie read the first line, then the second, then stopped because the letters blurred. "No," she whispered. Ethan's face changed. "No? I can't. That's too much." "It is not too much. I found a pill. You saw a danger and spoke when speaking cost you something. That is not small." Annie shook her head. "My grandmother needs medicine. Rent is due. I don't even know if I can keep up with school if this case keeps going. And if people find out, if they come after me, then we protect you." Rich people always say that before they get tired. The room went quiet. Annie realized what she had said and looked up quickly. "I'm sorry." Ethan did not look offended. He looked as if she had handed him something true and heavy. "No," he said. "You're right to ask what happens after the apology." Nora glanced over but did not interrupt. Ethan leaned forward. "The agreement includes independent support. Not controlled by me personally. Not dependent on whether you continue working at my house. And not affected by your testimony. If you decide tomorrow you never want to step inside Whitmore Estate again, the scholarship remains." Annie stared at him. "That was Nora's condition," Ethan added. Nora spoke from the window. "I don't like gifts that come with invisible chains." Annie looked at her, then back at Ethan. He gave a small nod. "Neither do I. Not anymore." Annie pressed her lips together, but the tears came anyway. She hated that they came in rooms like this, under lights that made everything visible. She wiped them quickly. "My grandmother told me not to let your money change the size of my soul." Ethan's expression softened. "Your grandmother is a woman I need to meet. She'll tell you what she thinks. I'm counting on it." Annie laughed once through the tears. Ethan slid a second page across the table. "There is something else, separate from school." Annie looked wary again. "This house needs to change," he said. "Not just locks and cameras. The way people are treated. The way staff concerns are heard. The way authority is checked. I trusted a man because he had been there a long time. I trusted my sister because she was blood. I did not build a system where someone like you could speak safely before everything became a crisis." Annie listened. "I'm creating a new position," Ethan said. "Staff Welfare and Household Operations Coordinator. It will start under Nora's oversight until we hire permanent management. Part-time, flexible with your school schedule, full wage, proper benefits. You don't have to accept, but if you do, I want your eyes on the parts of the house people like me tend not to see." Annie looked at Nora. "Is that real?" Nora nodded. "Real job description, real payroll, real authority. And if anyone calls you a maid like it's an insult, they answer to me first." That almost made Annie cry again. She looked back at Ethan. "Why me?" "Because when everyone else accepted the tray, you looked at the pill." The answer settled into the room. Annie thought of Harold saying her job was to scrub floors. Margaret saying she should remember where she was. Preston calling her that maid. Their voices had been loud in her head for days. Now another sentence entered quietly and took a chair. "You looked at the pill." "I need to talk to my grandmother," Annie said. "Of course. And I still want to finish my classes. That is the point. And I won't lie for you." Ethan almost smiled. "That is also the point." Caleb drove Annie home before noon. This time, she did not sit in the back as if afraid to touch the leather. She sat tired, quiet, holding the folder on her lap with both hands. The city looked the same through the window. Traffic, bus stops, men carrying lunch bags, women pushing strollers, old brick churches with signs about Sunday service. But something inside her had shifted. Not solved. Not healed. Just shifted enough that the road ahead no longer looked like a wall. Miss Evelyn opened the apartment door before Annie knocked. "Well?" she asked. Annie stepped inside and handed her the folder. Evelyn put on her glasses, sat at the kitchen table, and read slowly. Annie watched her grandmother's face as she moved through the pages. She saw suspicion first, then surprise, then a stillness that made Annie nervous. "Grandma?" Evelyn took off her glasses. "This says they'll pay for everything." "Yes, ma'am. And it says you don't owe them silence." Nora made sure. Evelyn looked at the papers again. Smart woman. She is. "And this job?" "I don't know yet." Evelyn leaned back, studying Annie. "Do you want it?" Annie sat across from her. "I'm scared to want it." "That wasn't my question." Annie looked around the apartment, the pillbox, the coupon drawer, the cracked tile near the stove, the nursing textbook on the chair, all the pieces of a life held together by effort and prayer. "I want to help make sure nobody in that house gets treated the way Harold treated me." Evelyn nodded. "Then don't go back as the girl they hired cheap. Go back as the woman who knows her worth." "I'm still 18, and I'm still old enough to tell you 18 is not nothing." Annie smiled. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Take the scholarship. Think on the job. And remember, gratitude is good, but debt is dangerous. Don't confuse the two." That evening, news of the board action reached the business press in careful language. Whitmore Holdings announced that Margaret Whitmore and Preston Vale had been suspended pending investigation into serious misconduct related to the health and governance of Chairman and CEO Ethan Whitmore. No names of household employees were released. Nora had made sure of that. Still, rumors moved. They always did. A text came to Annie's phone from Tasha. "Girl, is this about your rich people job?" Annie stared at it, then typed back, "I'll explain when I can. I'm okay." Tasha replied almost instantly, "You better be. Also, I'm proud of you for whatever I'm not allowed to know." Annie smiled for real this time. At Whitmore Estate, Ethan sat in his library, with Dr. Reed's approved medication beside a glass of water. He looked at the correct pills for a long moment before taking them. Such a small act. Such a large return of trust. Caleb stood near the door. "You sure you don't want me to stay inside tonight?" Caleb asked. Ethan swallowed the pills. "I'm sure. Security's doubled." "Good. Nora says Margaret's attorneys are already calling." "I expected that." Caleb waited. Ethan looked toward the empty hallway where Harold had once moved like he owned the house. "Do you think my mother would be ashamed of me?" Caleb took his time answering. "For being betrayed?" "No. For not seeing it." Caleb's voice softened. "She might say seeing late is better than choosing blindness." Ethan nodded slowly. The house was quiet, but not the same quiet as before. Before, silence had hidden things. Now it felt like rooms waiting to be cleaned properly for the first time in years. Across town, Annie placed the scholarship folder beside her nursing textbook. Miss Evelyn had gone to bed, though Annie knew she was not sleeping yet. Annie opened her notebook and wrote one line under tomorrow's class schedule. "I spoke, and I was heard." She looked at it for a long time. Then, beneath it, she wrote another line, "Now become worthy of the door." 3 months later, Annie Carter returned to Whitmore Estate on a clear winter morning, with a student ID clipped to her coat and a folder of staff reports under one arm. The house looked different in daylight now. Not smaller, exactly, but less untouchable. The iron gate still opened the same way. The oaks still lined the long drive. The windows still caught the sun like polished glass on a church table. But Annie no longer felt the old need to shrink as the car approached the entrance. Caleb parked near the side door, the same door staff had used for years, though it had a new keypad now and a small sign beside it. "All staff concerns may be reported without retaliation." Annie looked at it for a moment. Caleb followed her gaze. Nora's wording. "I guessed. She wanted it bigger." "Why isn't it bigger?" "Mr. Whitmore said people should read it, not feel yelled at by it." Annie smiled and stepped out. She still took classes 4 days a week. The scholarship had paid her tuition, books, lab fees, and even a used laptop that did not freeze every time she opened 2 tabs. Miss Evelyn had called the laptop that silver miracle, until Annie showed her how much the warranty cost. Then she called it that expensive little blessing instead. Annie had accepted the part-time staff welfare position after 2 weeks of thinking, praying, arguing with herself, and listening to Miss Evelyn ask the same question in 5 different ways. Do you want to help, or do you want to hide? Annie had finally answered both. She wanted to help, and she was tired of hiding. Inside the house, the changes were not loud. That was what made them real. Time clocks had been updated. Overtime was recorded automatically. Staff schedules were posted clearly. A locked complaint box sat outside Nora's temporary office. Though most people still preferred to talk to Mrs. Alvarez in the kitchen first, because the kitchen was where people told the truth after pretending all day. Harold's old office had been emptied. His stiff black uniforms were gone. His keys had been inventoried by police. His name was no longer spoken much. Not because people had forgotten, but because the house was learning not to let one man's shadow occupy every hallway. Margaret and Preston remained under investigation. Their attorneys had tried to call it a misunderstanding, then a medical error, then an internal family disagreement. The recordings had not cared what they called it. Daniel Price had turned over messages. Harold, facing charges, had eventually provided more. The case would take time. Nora warned everyone that justice moved with paperwork in its shoes. Slow doesn't mean stopped, Miss Evelyn had said when Annie told her. Ethan's health had improved, not all at once. Recovery did not arrive like a movie ending. It came in smaller proofs. A steadier hand at breakfast, fewer afternoon naps, no lost place in board meetings, less shame when he had to ask Dr. Reed a question twice. The cane stayed with him, but it no longer seemed to own him. That morning, Annie found him in the library, reading near the window with a cup of black coffee on the side table. He looked up when she knocked. "Come in, Miss Carter." She entered, then paused. The library had once made her nervous. It had felt like a room where people like her were allowed only to dust, never to sit. Now there were 2 chairs by the desk. One always left empty when Ethan expected her report. She placed the folder on the table. Staff updates for the week. Anything serious? Nothing like before. That is a low standard. Yes, sir. I'm raising it. Ethan's mouth lifted slightly. Good. Annie opened the folder. Mrs. Alvarez wants a written policy about breaks during events. The garden crew says supply requests still take too long. One of the new housekeepers, Lena, said she didn't know who to ask when a guest spoke to her disrespectfully. What did you tell her? That guests don't get to be cruel just because they're guests. Ethan leaned back. And how did she take that? She cried a little. He nodded. People often cry when a rule finally protects them. Annie looked at him. That sounded like something a man had learned late and meant to remember. He signed 2 approvals, then set the pen down. How are classes? Hard. Good hard or bad hard? Both. Pharmacology is trying to ruin my life. That sounds personal. It feels personal. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. And your grandmother? She says if Dr. Reed ever retires, she'll interview his replacement herself. I believe her. You should. For a moment, the room settled into an easy quiet. Outside, the lawn crew moved across the winter grass. Somewhere downstairs, a vacuum hummed. The house was working, but it did not feel afraid. Ethan looked at the folder, then at Annie. I never properly asked what you want after nursing school. Annie hesitated. I want to work with older patients, maybe home care, maybe rehab. People get ignored when they can't move fast anymore. They do, and I think, she stopped, embarrassed by the size of the thought. Ethan waited. I think one day I'd like to run a care program for people who can't afford private help. Not just medical stuff. Someone to check prescriptions, help with appointments, make sure nobody gets left alone with a drawer full of pills they can't read. Ethan did not answer immediately. That sounds needed. It sounds expensive. Most needed things do. Annie gave him a look. That wasn't me asking. I know. Mr. Whitmore. I said I know. His expression warmed a little. I'm learning not to turn every honest hope into a check before the person finishes speaking. That's good. Your grandmother again? Yes, sir. He nodded as if accepting the correction from a woman not in the room. Annie gathered the signed papers. Before she could leave, Ethan said, "Miss Carter." She turned back. "You once said people underestimate quiet folks." "I did. I think about that often." Annie smiled. "Still true. Yes, but not in this house anymore." The words returned from another day, another room, another version of both of them. This time, they did not feel like a promise made in anger. They felt like a rule being lived. Annie left the library and walked down the main hall. She passed the place where Harold had once pointed in her face. For months, she had expected to feel fear there. Sometimes she did. Memory had habits. But that morning, she stopped. No one else was in the hall. The marble floor reflected the light from the windows. A housekeeper named Lena came around the corner carrying folded towels. She slowed when she saw Annie. "Miss Carter, do these go in the east guest room or storage?" Annie almost looked behind her to see who Lena was talking to. Then she remembered. "East guest room," Annie said. "And Lena?" "Yes. If anyone tells you something feels wrong in this house, even if it seems small, write it down and tell me. Small things matter." Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Annie watched her go, feeling the strange weight of being trusted by someone who was still learning not to be afraid. At lunch, Mrs. Alvarez packed soup for Annie to take home to Miss Evelyn. Chicken and rice, extra carrots, no celery, because Evelyn called celery a vegetable with no purpose. Annie tucked the container into her bag beside her textbook and reports. Caleb drove her to the bus stop instead of home because Annie had class. She had asked him to stop doing full rides every day unless needed. "I rode buses before all this," she told him. "I can still ride them now." Caleb had frowned but agreed. "Call if anything feels off." "You always say that." "It keeps being true." At the stop, Annie waited with students, office workers, an older man carrying groceries, and a mother holding a sleeping child against her shoulder. The bus arrived late, sighing at the curb. Annie climbed on, paid her fare, and took a seat near the window. As the bus pulled away, Whitmore Estate disappeared behind trees and gates. But it no longer felt like another world. It was a place where something wrong had happened, where something true had been spoken, and where change had started because one person had looked closely at what others ignored. Annie opened her notebook during the ride. Beneath the line she had written months ago, "I spoke, and I was heard," she added a new one. "Now listen for others." She closed the notebook and looked out at Atlanta moving past. Churches, clinics, apartment balconies, pharmacies, grocery stores, people carrying their private burdens in public silence. She thought of Miss Evelyn's hands, Ethan's cane, Harold's keyring, Margaret's pearls, the amber bottle, the wrong pill, the right truth. Justice had not fixed everything. It had not erased insult, fear, betrayal, or the long habit of being underestimated, but it had opened a door. And sometimes, for people who had spent their lives standing outside, an open door was the beginning of a new life. That evening, Ethan sat alone in the library after the staff had gone. On his desk was a framed note Annie had written for herself during the investigation and accidentally left behind on a legal pad. He had asked permission before keeping a copy. "I am not lying. I am trying to warn you." He looked at those words for a long time. Then he placed his approved evening medication beside the glass of water, checked the label himself, and took the right pill. In another part of Atlanta, Annie helped Miss Evelyn sort her medicine for the week. Monday morning, Monday night. Tuesday morning, Tuesday night. The small clicks of the plastic lid sounded ordinary, almost peaceful. Miss Evelyn watched her granddaughter work. "You standing straighter these days," she said. Annie smiled without looking up. "Maybe. No, maybe about it." Annie closed the pill organizer. "Grandma? Do you think one person telling the truth really changes anything?" Miss Evelyn reached for her hand. "Baby, truth is like medicine. The right dose at the right time can save a life." Annie thought about that. Then she looked at the nursing textbook open beside her, and the scholarship folder tucked safely on the shelf. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, Annie Carter sat at a small kitchen table with the woman who had taught her to see clearly, and for the first time in a long time, the future did not feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she might help heal. The lesson of Annie's story is that truth should never be judged by the status of the person who speaks it. Sometimes the quietest person in the room sees what everyone else ignores, and sometimes courage begins with a trembling voice saying, "Something is wrong." Annie reminds us that dignity does not come from wealth, age, or position, but from the willingness to do what is right when silence would be easier. The story also shows that loyalty without honesty is dangerous, and real justice begins when the powerful finally listen to those who have been overlooked. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.